"Sweetheart," the flight attendant said, smiling like she was doing the girl a favor. "This seat doesn't come with special privileges." Calla blinked. "I pre-ordered a halal meal," she replied quietly. "It should be on the manifest." The woman leaned down, voice hushed but sharp. "Next time, try booking full fare. Maybe then we'll have what you want." And just like that, the cart rolled away, taking her dignity with it. Calla didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink again. She just picked up her phone and sent one message. Because her mother wasn't the type of woman you called for sympathy. She was the type who rewrote international flight protocol before breakfast. Have you ever stayed silent because no one expected you to matter? Tell us where you're watching from. First class was supposed to feel different. Not better, just quieter, safer, maybe a little warmer. That's what her mother always said. But here, somewhere over the Arabian Sea, with a tasteless pasta tray in front of her, and a tray table that smelled faintly of sanitizer and condescension, Calla Drexler felt something else entirely, like she didn't belong. The truth was, she hadn't wanted the upgrade. She'd flown economy before, window seat, hoodie over her head, noise-canceling headphones drowning out the world. She didn't need wine glasses or recliner beds or turmeric-scented hot towels, but this trip was different. Her mother had insisted. 12 hours earlier, New Delhi. Her mother, Leona Drexler, had booked the ticket from her corner suite on the 42nd floor of the Oberoi. She tapped through the airline's interface herself. No assistant, no AI filter. Just a single line of instruction to the concierge. First class, window seat, halal meal. Confirm all three. Calla had watched her do it. Like always, with quiet precision, like she was locking a missile system. Her mother didn't hope things would work. She engineered them to. But Calla had to fly back alone. Leona stayed behind for the GFIC summit, a meeting of compliance officers, ethics regulators, and global aviation insurers. The kind of people who didn't make headlines, but decided who could still fly them. Now, 38,000 feet in the air. The flight attendant, Brenna, crisp bun, navy skirt suit, red lipstick too sharp for her age, returned with a tray. No eye contact. She slid it onto Calla's table like it was a parking ticket. "Vegetarian penny," she said. "Best we've got." Calla peeled back the foil. Overcooked pasta, cream sauce with mushrooms, and cheese. She closed it again, lips pressed together. Across the aisle, a man in his 60s received his halal lamb meal without even asking. She noticed the sticker, H, just like the one she was supposed to get. He didn't look at her. She didn't expect him to. The silence pressed in harder than any insult. People thought being rich meant you never felt small, but Calla knew better. Money bought access, comfort, even anonymity. But it didn't protect you from moments like this, when someone decided you were less. She folded her hands in her lap. Her tray sat untouched. Later, when the lights dimmed and the cabin hushed into a collective sleep, she texted her mother. "Calla, didn't get the halal meal. Got a mushroom tray with cheese instead. I'm okay though." The reply didn't come instantly. It never did. Leona wasn't impulsive. Calla tucked the phone away. That was enough. She didn't need more. Somewhere over Istanbul, a soft chime echoed from the pilot's cabin. Beneath the fuselage, unknown to every passenger on board, a quiet signal was sent from Geneva, a flag in the GFIC system, changing the airline's internal classification. The screen blinked. Helios Airways, status, non-compliant, pending review. Reason, violation of dignity protocol, section 4.3, triggered by route authority, L. Drexler. None of that showed on the seatback monitor. Calla just sat, eyes closed, breathing slow. She wasn't planning revenge. She didn't fantasize about anyone getting fired. But she also didn't regret sending that message. Not because she was angry, but because she was her mother's daughter. When the flight began its descent, the captain made an unusual announcement. Due to airspace adjustments, we'll be diverting to Munich instead of Zurich. Thank you for your understanding. Calla opened her eyes. She didn't smile, not quite. But something in her chest, the part that had shrunk 3 hours ago, felt like it was standing up again. Geneva. 2 hours later, Leona Drexler didn't storm into any airline office. She didn't need to. She was waiting, calm, deliberate, in the Munich VIP terminal when her daughter stepped off the plane. No words, just a glance, and then a firm handshake with the federal ethics observer standing behind her. This wasn't about a meal. It never was. It was about who gets to be treated with dignity and who only gets upgrades. The VIP terminal in Munich was quiet. No announcements, no crowds, no security lines. Just clean glass, soft lighting, and the sound of efficiency. Calla stepped off the jet bridge escorted by a uniformed agent, but it wasn't because she was in trouble. It was because she was expected. At the far end of the lounge stood Leona Drexler, immaculate in a slate gray coat, tablet in one hand, untouched espresso in the other. She didn't walk over, didn't wave. She simply waited. Calla met her mother's eyes. No hug, no "are you okay?" Just a subtle nod, the kind that said, "I saw what happened, and now it's handled." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching raindrops streak down the massive terminal window. The tarmac gleamed beyond it. A ground crew moved slowly around a Helios Airways aircraft in the distance, the very one Calla had flown on just hours earlier. Then Leona spoke. "Passenger manifest shows you were logged correctly. Meal request was submitted on time. You were ticketed under my direct corporate account." Calla said nothing. She knew her mother wasn't looking for confirmation. "I flagged the airline's ethics compliance score," Leona continued. "They're now under 96-hour review." Calla looked over. "You did that already?" Leona sipped her espresso. 32 minutes after your message." In Geneva, inside the headquarters of the Global Flight Integrity Consortium, an alert pulsed on a large circular dashboard that tracked real-time ethical compliance across 61 airports and 11 major airline groups. Alert. Ethics flag. Initiated. Level 2. Priority discretionary. Authority root. L. Drexler. Inside a secure conference room, 3 ethics monitors leaned in. They didn't panic. Not yet. But they knew what it meant when a Level 2 flag was triggered by Leona Drexler. She wasn't just CEO of SkySure International, the world's largest aviation insurance group. She was one of only 6 people on Earth with root authority clearance, the power to shift an airline's operational risk category with a single flag. Her signals didn't go to PR teams. They went to underwriters, regulators, financial bodies. And once the tag was live, it triggered a clock. Back in Munich, Calla scrolled silently on her phone while Leona reviewed a file on her tablet. "You're not upset?" Leona asked casually. "I'm used to it," Calla said. That made Leona pause. "That's not the goal." Calla glanced up. "What is?" Leona looked out toward the tarmac again. "The goal is for them to never forget who they were talking to, even if they didn't know it in the moment." 18 hours later, in New York City, news had quietly reached the executive office of the ESG Funding Alliance that Helios Airways had been marked as pending ethics degradation. It was a subtle status, not public, not scandalous. But for institutions that moved billions in value across borders, that one phrase meant watch list. Within 6 hours, $1.1 billion in sustainability-linked bonds tied to the airline's fuel initiative were frozen. 3 ESG funds quietly removed Helios from their compliance portfolio. Helios's CFO received a private message from a Zurich-based lender. "Until status clarified, we're holding renewal on the 200-power bridge facility." In Zurich, at the Helios Airways headquarters, Chief Risk Officer Brent Meyer had barely slept. He was pacing. "This can't be happening over one passenger meal," he shouted, slamming his hand on a conference table. The compliance officer, a younger woman named Leona, looked pale. "It's not the meal. It's who the passenger was." "Some rich kid?" he sneered. "No," she whispered. "That was Calla Drexler." Brent froze. "The daughter of Leona Drexler," Elena continued. "The same Leona who chairs the GFIC Ethics Board. And Sky Shore." Brent sank into his chair. He knew what came next. 48 hours after the flight, 3 major airport alliances, NordJet Gateway, Lufthansa One, and Aerolux Partners, had temporarily suspended priority processing for Helios flights. Not canceled, just delayed. But in the aviation world, delayed was death. Cargo rerouted. Loyalty contracts paused. Reputation dented. And behind all of it? No press conference, no scandal, just a flag and a dashboard, blinking quietly. Back at home in Geneva, Calla sat on her balcony with a book in her lap. She wasn't reading. She was thinking. Her mother stepped outside, offering her a glass of hibiscus iced tea. "They called," Leona said. "CEO of Helios. Offered an apology. Offered a scholarship. Offered a photo op." Calla raised an eyebrow. "Did you accept?" "No." "Why not?" Leona looked at her daughter. Truly looked. "Because next time they see a girl like you in 2A, they'll remember. They'll think twice." Calla didn't smile, but she understood. 72 hours later, GFIC issued a statement. Effective immediately, Helios Airways is required to sign and adopt the Passenger Dignity Framework, a compliance standard designed to ensure equitable service regardless of race, background, gender, or class of fare. At the bottom of the release, the name of the framework's original author was printed in small font, written and approved by L. Drexler. Back on the flight that started it all, Brenna, the flight attendant with the stiff smile, opened her email while getting ready for her next route. A message flashed. "Your conduct on flight EU 4827 has triggered an investigation under the updated Passenger Dignity Framework. Your status is under review." She blinked, clicked through, and saw the case file. There was a passenger photo, seat 2A. She recognized the face. But now, she also recognized the name. Calla Drexler wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was simply the daughter of the woman who rewrote the rulebook and handed it to the people who thought girls like her didn't matter. They called it the framework. Not a rulebook, not a policy, not even a law. But within 72 hours of its quiet activation, every major airline legal team had a copy open on their desks. It wasn't even public yet. Not officially. But it was moving. Because when Leona Drexler authored something and attached her compliance signature through the GFIC system, the industry didn't wait for headlines. It adjusted. Silently, swiftly, and often in fear. At its core, the Passenger Dignity Framework was elegant. 12 pages, 6 core principles, one goal: to standardize the ethics of how passengers are treated, regardless of status, race, religion, or payment class. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't about shaming anyone. It was about systemic consequence. At Helios Airways, panic had shifted into paralysis. The internal chat logs were filled with messages from risk, legal, operations, PR. "Can we contest the flag? How long does a level 2 hold last? Why are we being cut from ESG fund lists in Germany?" But the real storm wasn't in the chat room. It was in the boardroom, where CEO Marius Klein sat at the head of the long conference table, clutching a glass of still water that he hadn't touched. "We'll issue a press release," someone suggested. "No," said Elena, the compliance officer. "If we go public, it becomes a story. Right now, it's just a system flag." Marius stared at her. "She didn't make it public?" he asked. "No," she said. "Leona never does." Meanwhile, in Geneva, Leona Drexler sat in her private home office overlooking the Rhone. It was barely 7 a.m. The city was waking up, but her screen was already lit with a flurry of inbound messages from insurers, fund regulators, airport partners. She read them all, replied to none. Instead, she opened the final draft of the framework and reviewed each line one last time. The system was moving exactly as designed. No drama, no court orders, just compliance pressure, quiet and clean. Calla entered the room silently, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one down by her mother. "I looked it up," she said. "Your framework already got adopted in beta at 3 Gulf airports." Leona didn't look up. "Good." Calla leaned on the edge of the desk. "Why didn't you go bigger?" Leona finally looked at her. "Because the world doesn't change when people are angry," she said. "It changes when systems become inconvenient." Back in Zurich, the mood had shifted. Someone on Helios's board had leaked internal financial stress signals to Bloomberg Europe. Suddenly, the situation wasn't silent anymore. Helios Airways faces pressure after ethics flag. SkySure CEO quietly forces industry review. Passenger rights charter may become global standard. The damage wasn't loud, but it was constant. By the end of the week, a $275 million refinancing round had been delayed. A Canadian airport coalition suspended a code-share route, and whistleblowers within Helios had come forward, including 2 flight attendants who confirmed that veiled discrimination was common, especially when passengers looked like they didn't fit the mold of first class. That word, mold, spread fast. It was subtle, but lethal. At home, Calla watched it unfold from a distance. She wasn't on social media. She didn't need validation, but a quiet email showed up in her inbox, a draft copy of a news article, courtesy of a friend at a journalism review board. The headline made her pause. The passenger in seat 2A changed everything without saying a word. She read it twice, not because she liked the attention, but because it reminded her that the most powerful kind of justice often didn't have a voice, just presence and leverage. She thought back to the moment on the plane, how small she'd felt, how calculated the dismissal had been. They didn't just forget her. They decided she didn't belong. And now, quietly, that decision was costing them everything. Helios scrambled to sign the framework. They agreed to all 12 provisions, submitted a public statement of compliance, and announced a new Diversity and Passenger Equity Task Force to show good faith. It didn't matter, because GFIC, under Leona's direction, had quietly set one more step in motion. A clause at the bottom of the framework. Airlines signing after public incident acknowledgement will be subject to a 12-month probationary scoring window. That meant Helios's recovery wouldn't be instant. They'd have to earn their way back, under quarterly review. Every passenger complaint would now affect their global landing clearances. Every ethics breach could suspend cross-border cargo rights, and every investor would see the score, in real time. They weren't blacklisted. They were under glass. 1 week later, Leona was invited to speak at a closed-door conference of aviation executives in Oslo. She declined. Instead, she sent a 3-slide presentation. The final slide was simple. It's not about passengers who look different. It's about systems that treat them differently. We don't need louder apologies. We need quieter standards. It went viral within the private sector. 24 hours later, 4 other airlines signed the Passenger Dignity Framework voluntarily. Not because they were forced, but because they saw what happened when you ignored a girl in 2A. On a rainy afternoon, as Calla walked through the arrivals hall in Geneva after another solo flight, she passed by a small group of airline staff near the check-in counters. One of them looked up, nodded politely, and said, "Welcome back, Miss Drexler. Your notes were received." She paused. "I didn't submit any notes." He smiled. "Someone did. Said you shouldn't have to." And for the first time since that flight, Calla smiled back. She wasn't looking for power. She was just tired of people assuming she didn't have it. And thanks to her mother, and a system built to respond to silence, now the whole industry knew. Even a quiet girl in first class might be holding the pen that rewrites your future. They didn't see her coming. That was the thing about Leona Drexler. She never entered a fight with noise. She entered with systems. 3 days after the first domino fell at Helios Airways, Leona began her second phase, not by calling out names, but by calling in favors. In her private vault, a literal steel-reinforced room built beneath her estate, sat 19 years of quietly compiled case files, passenger testimonials, whistleblower affidavits, audit anomalies. Some were unresolved, some were buried by NDAs, but every one of them was linked to 5 airlines whose names had come up more than once in her radar: Helios, Novair, FalconEast, Apex Sky, Eurojet. Each had glowing ads about diversity. Each had internal ethics scores that looked fine. And each had quietly settled lawsuits involving passenger mistreatment, particularly passengers of color, neurodivergent passengers, and non-binary travelers. Leona wasn't interested in headlines. She was interested in patterns. And she had just found one. At the Global Flight Integrity Consortium headquarters in Geneva, Leona called for a closed-door emergency session. Only 7 people were cleared to attend, all route-level clearance holders. They sat in a circular room with no phones, no recordings, and a single live analytics screen at the center. Leona stood. "I've activated Clause 11 of the framework," she announced. There was a pause. Clause 11 was rarely touched. It allowed for cross-airline behavioral correlation audits, essentially comparing the ethics logs of multiple airlines side by side to spot shared violations. It was the closest thing aviation had to pulling back the curtain. "Are you suggesting collusion?" one director asked. "I'm suggesting systemic behavior disguised as isolated incidents," she replied. "And we now have the data to prove it." Meanwhile, in a sleek office tower in London, FalconEast Airlines chief counsel received an encrypted notice. "You are hereby notified that a Level 3 correlation audit has been triggered by Route Authority. Prepare all passenger service records, internal flagging protocols, and whistleblower correspondence from Q3 and Q4 of the past year." He stared at the message. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and muttered, "It's Drexler." Back in Geneva, Calla was watching everything unfold, not from the sidelines, but from within the perimeter. Her mother had begun letting her sit in on certain non-sensitive calls. Not to train her, Leona hated that word, but to let her observe how systems moved when no one was watching. Calla took notes. She asked questions. She read case files that made her stomach twist. Passengers duct taped for non-compliance. Girls harassed for what they wore. Elderly men denied boarding because their accents were unclear. "I thought the framework was already the win," Calla said quietly. Leona shook her head. The framework was the invitation. What comes next is the reckoning. The reckoning came faster than expected. A leaked internal document from Eurojet surfaced online. A training manual slide stating, "First-class demeanor expectations. Anticipate compliance. Avoid conflict. Protect premium experience perception." Translation? Don't argue with white men in suits. Do challenge anyone who doesn't look first class. It exploded on social media. But by then, Leona had already sent the document to the Federal Aviation Ethics Board with one line in her cover note. "You told us to prove it. Here's your proof." Within 48 hours, 3 federal agencies requested testimony from Leona and GFIC's Ethics Board. 2 class action suits were filed against Novair and FalconEast. 7 senators began drafting the Passenger Equity Act, a bill that would require every airline operating in the U.S. to publicly publish their quarterly ethics data. And one surprise enemy made his move. Inside GFIC's inner council, a man named Roland Mertz, a senior compliance executive who had long opposed Leona's growing influence, called for a vote. His motion? Suspend Clause 11, audit powers pending third-party review. He claimed it was about overreach, that Leona was moving too fast, too forcefully, and threatening international aviation partnerships with her moral crusade. In truth, Roland had personal ties to one of the 5 audited airlines. Leona knew that, but she didn't call him out. She simply moved strategically. She sent a private ethics alert to the European Aviation Commission, tagging a specific deal Roland had lobbied for months earlier, a cross-insurance platform between FalconEast and a Luxembourg-based reinsurer. Within hours, the commission opened an inquiry. Within days, Roland stepped down to focus on personal matters. And Leona? She didn't comment. Because the best revenge wasn't loud. It was procedural. As the audits continued, airlines scrambled. Call centers rewrote scripts overnight. Training manuals vanished from internal servers. Executives offered scholarships, DEI statements, partnerships with influencers. None of it mattered. Because for the first time, passenger dignity had metrics. And Leona held the standard. Late one night, Calla found her mother still working, light spilling from her office into the hallway. She stood at the door. "You could have done all this years ago," Calla said. "I had to wait," Leona replied without looking up. "For what?" "For the world to be tired enough to let me." In Washington, a draft version of the Passenger Equity Act was sent to committee. Its first line quoted the framework. Its second listed the names of 5 passengers whose cases triggered the audit wave. And C2A, that name was redacted in black ink, but everybody knew. It was the girl who didn't fight, didn't shout. She just made one quiet call, and her mother moved the system. Whistleblowers rarely get second chances, especially not in aviation. So when a voice memo surfaced from an anonymous Helios flight supervisor, detailing a direct order to de-escalate the girl in 2A by delaying her meal without confrontation, it wasn't just a scandal. It was sabotage, and someone inside wanted the world to know it. The voice on the recording was calm, strategic, and clearly aware that the girl in 2A didn't look like she belonged in first class. What they didn't know was that this voice memo, sent to the Internal Compliance Archive, had been marked for deletion. Only one problem. A junior tech named Ria Patel had copied it first. Ria was a recent hire, mid-20s, sharp, and too smart for the job she had. She worked the ethics compliance backend at Helios, mostly monitoring flagged incidents for pattern recognition. She hadn't expected to find anything major until that file appeared, unlabeled, unarchived, and time-stamped 5 hours after the Zurich incident. She listened once, then again, then quietly uploaded it to an encrypted public drop used by global ethics monitors. She didn't add her name. She didn't have to, because by morning, the clip had already made its way to Leona Drexler's private line. Leona listened with the kind of stillness that made people nervous. No rage, no disgust, just precision. This wasn't about one girl or one flight. This was an internal strategy, and someone at Helios was trying to erase the trail. Within minutes, Leona flagged the deletion protocol to the GFIC's audit division. Clause 7 of the Passenger Dignity Framework explicitly barred any alteration or erasure of passenger treatment documentation during an active review window. Now, it wasn't just ethics, it was obstruction. By noon, a subpoena was issued to Helios Airways. By 3 p.m., major aviation funds had begun divesting, and by 6 p.m., the Global Flight Integrity Consortium called an emergency panel session. For the first time, Calla was invited, not just to observe, but to speak. She stood behind the black marble podium, papers in hand, wearing a navy blazer 2 sizes too big. It had once belonged to her mother, back when Leona had fought her first insurance board into compliance. The room wasn't large, just 16 officials and analysts. But it felt like standing in front of the world. They introduced her formally. Ms. Calla Drexler, speaking in capacity as lead case observer for Seat 2A. She didn't smile, didn't shift. She just read, I didn't speak that day on the plane because I was taught that silence makes less trouble. But it shouldn't take someone with connections or a last name to get a meal you paid for. And when silence becomes strategy, when mistreatment becomes measurable, that's when a system has to decide who it's built for. No applause, just stillness, and every eye fixed on her. One of the more senior auditors, a grizzled Frenchman with gray brows and quiet posture, leaned into the mic. Ms. Drexler, if I may, do you believe this treatment was the result of personal bias or an institutional pattern? Calla paused, then answered slowly. I don't think it matters anymore, because if it was personal, it's on them. If it's institutional, it's on all of us. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the chair of the panel, a stern Swiss woman named Adler, leaned forward and said, "Well said. Let the record show her testimony will be included in the audit's closing documentation." Calla stepped down, heartbeat like thunder in her chest. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't emotional, but because it wasn't about her anymore. It was about every girl who'd been quietly taught to stay quiet. Back at Helios HQ, internal panic reached code red. They launched a full-scale internal review, but too late. Riya Patel, the junior tech, had already filed for whistleblower protection under international ethics protocol, and thanks to GFIC's direct backing, her testimony was now untouchable. CNN picked it up. So did the BBC. So did Forbes. The story wasn't just about discrimination anymore. It was about deliberate sabotage and corporate cover-up. And every time they tried to spin it, a new document leaked, a memo, a deleted Slack thread, a private message chain from an exec saying, just delay her service until Zurich, no drama. Every file, every line made the system bleed. Leona never commented publicly. She didn't have to. Instead, she began laying out the final enforcement clause of the framework, a mandatory public compliance scorecard. Airlines would have to publish quarterly passenger service equity ratings, whistleblower protection status, staff bias, incident response times, infractions flagged versus resolved. And Calla, she had been asked to co-author the index report that would interpret the data for public readership. She hesitated at first, then signed her name. On a gray Friday morning, Calla walked alone through the Zurich airport once again, but this time through a different terminal. As she passed a digital wall of departure screens, something caught her eye. A small framework-verified badge beside Helios Airways' name, but marked in orange, not green. She tapped on it. A screen loaded. Passenger equity score, 38,100 under probation. Full review pending last incident, May 4th, seat 2A. She didn't smile. She just took a breath and kept walking. That night, she returned to Geneva. In the quiet of her mother's study, Calla sat with the final draft of the audit closure report in her lap. She flipped to the last page. There, beneath the official seal of GFIC, were two signatures. Leona Drexler, Chair, Framework. Enforcement Calla Drexler, Observational Ethics Analyst. She stared at her name, not because she needed to see it, but because now the system saw her too. The message came at 2:17 a.m. Calla was half asleep, curled under a fleece blanket on the couch in her mother's study, the soft glow of Geneva's lights flickering against the window pane. She'd meant to stay up just a little longer, skimming through revisions to the Passenger Integrity Index report. Instead, her phone buzzed once, then again. A private message from an unknown contact. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I know what they did to you." At first, she thought it was spam, but when she opened the message, her breath caught. Attached was a screenshot of a FalconEast internal chat log, not the public server, but a private Slack archive. The highlighted message was dated just hours after the Zurich flight scandal broke. "That girl in 2A. If we let this Drexler kid win, every seat on this industry's gonna need a lawyer." Beneath it, the name and email of the sender, Natalie Varner. Executive Communications Coordinator, daughter of Alan Varner, VP of International Relations at FalconEast. For 10 seconds, Calla stared blankly. Then a second message arrived. I've seen what my father and his friends do behind closed doors. The emails, the dinners, the quiet removals. I've stayed silent long enough. I'm not brave like you, but I'm tired of watching this machine hurt people and spin it as policy. They'll disown me if I speak out, but I've already copied everything. I just don't know who to trust. Calla sat up slowly, her heart thudding harder than she liked. She knew what this meant. Not a leak, a confession, from the inside. She waited until sunrise before saying a word. Then she knocked gently on Leona's office door. Her mother was already awake, coffee in hand, reading the global headlines like they were personal memos. Another ethics fund dropped Helios, she said without looking up. That makes 4. Calla sat across from her, opened her phone, and silently passed it over. Leona read the message, then looked up, not with surprise, but with recognition. She's the daughter of Alan Varner, she said softly. I remember the name. He used to sit on a compliance oversight panel 5 years ago, voted against ethics publication twice, said it would create unnecessary fear. Calla's voice was quiet. She has documents, screenshots, internal threads. She wants help, but she's scared. Leona didn't blink. Of course she is. The first person to speak always is. That afternoon, Calla wrote back. She didn't say much. I believe you. You don't have to go public, but if you want this to stop, really stop. You're not alone anymore. Natalie replied almost instantly. They used to laugh when ethics reports came up, called them PR theater. I have a folder of 87 internal chats. Half of them mock the framework, a few mock you. Calla smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Send everything. Let's clean house. 3 days later, the files arrived. Encrypted, cross-checked, time-stamped. What they revealed wasn't just misconduct. It was a system of coordinated denial. First-class upgrades denied based on last names and visual impressions. A protocol suggesting passengers be managed quietly if their identity carries litigation risk. Internal code words like coffee delay and 2B skip used to stall or avoid service for flagged passengers. And most damning of all, a memo from Alan Varner himself advising FalconEast crew managers to monitor visibly underage passengers in premium cabins, as their presence may trigger discomfort in higher-value clients. In short, racial profiling, age discrimination, class enforcement, all wrapped in legalese, all sent by men who smiled on camera and promised equal skies for all. Leona submitted the files to GFIC and the International Aviation Ethics Board under a joint protocol. Natalie's name was never mentioned, but her fingerprints were everywhere. And for the first time, an entire airline's leadership faced full-scope investigation under the passenger equity framework. Calla was quiet the night the story broke. She sat alone on the rooftop terrace, staring at the Geneva skyline, phone in hand. It buzzed again. Another message from Natalie. They found out. My father froze my accounts, cut my company access, told me I was dead to him. But you know what? I feel lighter than I have in years. Calla wrote back with just one line. So do I. The next morning, Leona placed a sealed envelope on Calla's desk. Inside was a formal letter from GFIC. In recognition of your role in facilitating cross-source coordination and providing verified evidence of internal suppression of passenger rights, we are formally appointing you as Special Youth Advisor to the Passenger Integrity Charter. Calla read it twice, then looked at her mother. Am I ready for this? Leona tilted her head. Were you ready when you stood up at the panel? No. But you did it anyway. Calla smiled for real this time. That evening, the two of them sat side by side in silence, mother and daughter, systems architect and spark. Outside, the world moved as it always had. But inside, a shift had begun, because someone made one quiet call. and someone else finally answered it. The hearing room in Brussels was colder than Calla expected. Not physically, the temperature was fine, but there was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with HVAC. It was the kind of chill that came from legacy power pretending to be polite. Calla sat at a slim wooden desk, facing 7 representatives from some of the oldest airlines in Europe and Asia. The walls were pale gray. The microphones had red LED rings that blinked when recording. The moment she spoke, those rings would light up. Next to her sat no one. Not her mother, not a GFIC ethics officer, just her, a water glass, and 37 pages of testimony. The chairwoman of the panel, a silver-haired woman from EuroAir with the charisma of a retired monarch, spoke first. "Ms. Drexler, we thank you for your presence. However, several of us are deeply concerned that the Passenger Integrity Charter, as currently written, places disproportionate compliance burdens on long-established carriers. Would you agree that older systems deserve accommodations?" Calla didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. I believe older systems should know better." That was the first red ring to light up. The room was full of small gestures, cleared throats, polite nods, hands tapping pens against wood. But underneath, it was clear. This wasn't a review. It was a resistance. The charter had gone too far, too fast. That's what the legacy carriers said. They complained about having to publish quarterly ethics reports, about having to retrain veteran staff, about needing approval for new AI-based boarding tools that tracked passenger profiling incidents. They called it burdensome. Calla called it accountability. She'd spent the last 6 weeks working with whistleblowers, ethics coordinators, even economists. She had data on passenger treatment, class-based denial patterns, and the financial impact of ethics violations. She'd watched her own mother bring this system to life, but now it was her turn to defend it, alone. One of the board members leaned into his mic. "Ms. Drexler, some of us find your tone concerning. Are you suggesting that these long-standing institutions have operated unethically for decades?" Calla paused, then said evenly, "I'm saying they've had decades to fix it, and many didn't, until someone forced them to." More red lights. Behind the scenes, Leona was watching the live stream with narrowed eyes. She could tell the panel was trying to corner Calla with legal framing and historical reverence. They kept repeating words like tradition, infrastructure, and respect. But Leona had taught her daughter well. Tradition was only valuable if it didn't trample people. She didn't call in reinforcements, didn't make a speech. She let Calla stand on her own. Calla adjusted the mic and leaned forward. "I know I'm not what this room is used to. I'm 19. I don't wear a title. I didn't build a billion-dollar airline. I didn't come from this industry. But I know what it feels like to be told your seat doesn't belong to you." Silence. She let that hang in the air. "You're not being asked to give up power. You're being asked to share accountability. And if that scares you, maybe the issue isn't the charter. Maybe it's that some of you don't want your passengers to see how the system really works." This time, even the chairwoman didn't speak. Outside the hearing room, a small crowd had gathered. Press, activists. 2 girls Calla didn't know were holding a hand-drawn sign. "Passenger dignity is not optional." When she walked out, the flashes came fast. Camera shutters clicking, voices shouting questions. But she didn't stop, didn't wave, just kept walking, because she knew what would happen next. Inside the board chambers, a closed vote was held. And for the first time in consortium history, the exemption clause was struck down. The charter would go forward. No grandfathering, no loopholes, no legacy immunity. The ethics system, from now on, would apply to everyone. 2 nights later, Calla sat beside her mother on the patio of their home outside Geneva. The air smelled like night jasmine. Their phones were off. Leona handed her a cup of chamomile tea. "You did more than hold the line," she said. "You expanded it." Calla didn't respond at first. Then, they looked at me like I didn't belong in that room. Leona smiled, not kindly, but proudly. That's how you know you're exactly where you should be. The next morning, the first public rollout of the Passenger Integrity Charter went live. Each airline received a live ethics score, displayed beside its name on major booking platforms. Color-coded, transparent, updated monthly. And under each score, a new line, verified by the Drexler framework. It wasn't just a policy. It was proof. That silence had broken. That justice had become visible. That one call from a girl denied a meal had become a charter that changed the skies. The email came from an encrypted address Calla didn't recognize. Subject line: Before FalconEast buries the charter, you need to see this. Attached was a single PDF. Internal memorandum: FalconEast strategy session, May 12th, legal path to neutralize GFIC oversight. Calla opened it slowly, her stomach tightening with every scroll. It wasn't speculation. It was blueprinted sabotage. According to the document, FalconEast had been quietly preparing to lobby 4 member countries of the International Aviation Ethics Board to revoke recognition of the Drexler framework, citing overreach, loss of trade parity, and privacy conflict with legacy databases. They weren't trying to argue ethics. They were trying to kill jurisdiction, legally. Because if those 4 nations pulled out, the entire enforcement wing of the Passenger Integrity Charter would collapse. And the worst part? The memo was signed off by someone Calla knew by name, Gideon Shaw, head of strategic affairs at EastCap Holdings, the very same finance firm that had once backed GFIC's early research. She stared at the screen for a long time, then wrote one sentence back to the sender. "Who are you?" The reply came 2 minutes later. "The guy who used to block every ethics clause you ever fought for. But I was wrong, and I want to fix it. Meet me. No press, no recordings." That guy? Thomas Ellery, former chief compliance architect for EastCap's aviation portfolio. The man who had once tried to remove Leona Drexler from a funding seat, calling her a liability to profitability. Now, he wanted to talk. They met in a private corner booth of a weathered cafe near Lake Geneva. No cameras, no handlers, just 2 people sitting across a scratched wooden table. Calla folded her arms. "You nearly shut us down 3 years ago." Thomas nodded, eyes steady. "And I've regretted it since." "Why now?" He didn't blink. "Because I saw the boardroom notes. They're not trying to improve policy. They're trying to gut the entire ethics structure before it can scale. If FalconEast succeeds, 5 other carriers will follow." Calla leaned back, processing. "You could have stayed quiet." "I tried, but my daughter's in college now. She flew Helios last month, first class, alone. I didn't like how they looked at her when she walked on. And I realized, if I keep funding these systems, I'm part of the thing I thought I was above." He handed her a flash drive. Everything was on it. Audio from internal FalconEast planning calls, draft talking points for deregulation press releases. A legal memo outlining how to target Calla's own name as a non-government actor interfering in public policy. That last one hit hard. They weren't just going after the charter anymore. They were coming for her. Back at home, Calla stared out at the lake. Evening mist blurred the horizon. Her mother walked in without knocking. "He gave it all to you?" Calla nodded. Leona looked at her quietly. "This is where the story either breaks or becomes legacy." Calla didn't flinch. "I didn't come this far to be erased." Within 48 hours, the GFIC convened an emergency digital tribunal. Calla submitted the audio, the memos, the threat documents. Then she did something no one expected. She waived her anonymity and formally accused FalconEast of malicious obstruction, jurisdictional subversion, personal defamation intended to intimidate an ethics representative. Her closing sentence became the most quoted line on aviation ethics blogs for the next 6 months. If your answer to accountability is to erase the people demanding it, then you don't fear overreach. You fear exposure. FalconEast's legal team tried to bury the damage, but it was too late. The tribunal ruled unanimously to uphold the charter's enforcement status, and under pressure from investors, FalconEast was forced to suspend 3 board members and publicly reaffirm compliance with the Drexler framework. But Calla didn't gloat. She didn't post. She just sat in silence that night, holding the flash drive that nearly undid everything, and whispered, almost to herself, "One leak saved it. One man changed sides." Then she messaged Thomas Ellery 2 words, "Thank you." The next week, she gave her first public keynote, not in Geneva, not in Brussels, but in Atlanta, standing in front of 500 aviation students at a university lecture hall. She didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like a survivor of something invisible, the kind of injustice that doesn't leave bruises, only policies. She ended with, "This wasn't about meals or first-class seats. It was about who the system expects to be invisible, and whether we keep letting that happen, or change the rules for good." The students stood up, not to clap, to walk up and shake her hand, one by one. Calla didn't sleep the night before the vote. She sat by the balcony window in her Geneva apartment, still dressed in a soft navy hoodie, legs pulled to her chest, eyes on the city lights. Tomorrow morning, the aviation world would decide whether the Drexler framework, the passenger ethics system that started with her denied first-class meal, would become a permanent global standard. It had taken 11 weeks, hundreds of pages of documentation, 4 closed-door hearings, 3 whistleblowers, and her own name, dragged through media cycles by legacy airline PR machines trying to paint her as too young, too emotional, not an expert. And yet, here it was. 1 vote, 7 nations. If 5 approved, the charter would lock in as global aviation compliance law for all signatory carriers. If 3 blocked, the entire system would remain non-binding, and the momentum she and her mother built could crumble overnight. At 8:00 a.m., the first message came in. Germany, approved. By 9:00, she had her laptop open, live stream running, fingers tight on a mug of mint tea she hadn't sipped. The voting body appeared one by one. US, Japan, Canada, UK, Singapore, Brazil, and France. Each had 5 minutes to explain their vote. Calla's name came up 8 times before the second vote was cast, not always kindly. The Canadian rep, a sharp-suited man in his 60s, said it flat out. "This system is ambitious, but its central architect is a 19-year-old with no formal aviation experience. We must ask, are we rewriting global standards on the basis of one anecdote?" Calla didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. Then the UK rep stood up, a woman in her 50s, modest glasses, ivory blouse, but eyes like steel. "You're wrong. We're not rewriting standards based on one anecdote. We're rewriting them because you've ignored thousands. Ms. Drexler just refused to look away." UK, approved. The third vote? Brazil. Abstained. Neutral. Not blocking, but not backing either. Her mother leaned in from the other side of the room and whispered, "It's okay. We expected that." Calla nodded, but her fingers gripped the edge of her chair. 3 votes down, still on edge. Then came the voice Calla had most feared, Japan's representative. Their airline consortium had lobbied hard for a grace period, 36 months without enforcement to avoid international fines. They called the framework culturally disruptive. She braced herself, but instead he bowed and said gently, "What you call disruption, we call correction. For 20 years, we have protected systems more than people. Today, that ends." Japan, approved. That was 3 yes, 1 abstain. She needed 2 more. Next, Singapore. They'd been silent for weeks. No public comment, no press release. But the rep opened with a quote Calla recognized. Passenger dignity is not optional. It was the sign she'd seen back in Brussels, held by two teen girls at the protest line. The rep smiled. We found that phrase on a live stream. It was painted by two 16-year-olds. We'll be voting yes, because this charter doesn't represent power. It represents people. Singapore approved. 4 yes. Then came France. Everyone knew they were the wild card. Their national carrier had spent millions trying to stop the charter. Their aviation unions were split. Calla held her breath. The French representative spoke in slow, polished English. Your system is young. It is imperfect, but so was democracy when it began. A pause. We vote yes. The screen flickered. The votes tallied in real time. Germany, yes UK, yes Brazil. Abstain, Japan, yes Singapore, yes France, yes US. Pending. Calla blinked. Wait, pending? The United States, her home country, was the last vote uncast. Of course they would stall. The airlines, the lobbyists, the endless layers of red tape. 5 yes votes were enough. But the US vote would be symbolic. If they voted no, the charter would pass, but lose global credibility. If they voted yes, it would cement the system forever. Then a new window opened on the live stream. An older man appeared. Wire-rimmed glasses, navy blue tie. Deputy FAA Director Raymond Hughes. He looked straight into the camera. A few months ago, a girl boarded a flight from Zurich and was quietly told that her seat didn't earn her a meal. She didn't shout. She didn't sue. She did something harder. She stayed and made a system out of her silence. He paused. The United States votes yes. Calla exhaled all at once. Leona sat down beside her, eyes wet. She whispered, "That's it. You did it." But Calla shook her head gently. We did it. 2 days later, the first International Ethics Dashboard went live. Every airline, 187 of them, now had a public ethics score. Color-coded, passenger reviewed, AI verified. And at the bottom of every page, a quiet credit line. Framework designed and ratified by Calla Drexler. She didn't post on social media that night, didn't attend the gala her mother was invited to. She walked to a small hill behind their house, sat in the grass, and stared at the sky, and whispered to the stars. This started with a tray of food. Now the sky feels different. 3 weeks after the charter passed, a video went viral. It didn't come from Europe, not the US either. It came from a connecting flight out of Dubai, headed to South Asia. The footage was grainy, shot on a phone. A flight attendant stood in the aisle, blocking a woman holding a baby. Her accent was thick. Her boarding pass clearly read first class. But the crew member kept repeating, "This seat is reserved for premium travelers only, not for refugees." The woman didn't yell. She just held her baby closer, quietly returned to coach. The video cut off after that, but within 12 hours, the footage had 43 million views. Calla watched it twice, then sat back in silence. This wasn't a Drexler charter country. This airline wasn't bound to any ethics rating. No one could suspend its score. No platform would flag the video as a violation. It was outside the system, and for the first time in weeks, she realized, we didn't build something global. We built something regional, and the people who need it most are still unprotected. That night, she called her mother. Leona answered on the second ring. Calla's voice was low. What if the charter isn't enough, sir? There was a pause. Then Leona said, then maybe it's time you stop defending the system and start expanding it. The next morning, Calla did something no one expected. She stepped down as GFIC liaison, not because she was leaving the movement, but because she needed to build something new, without the old boardroom friction, the bureaucratic pace, the compromises. She founded something from scratch. Ether, the Global Passenger Dignity Network. an independent AI-integrated coalition that tracked airline behavior worldwide, even outside formal charter zones. No government permission, no corporation veto power, just real-time data, whistleblower protection, and public action. And the first region she launched it in? Southeast Asia. Her first trip was to Kuala Lumpur. She met with local passenger rights groups, activists, ex-pilots, tech volunteers, mothers who'd lost children to deportation flights, cabin crews who'd been fired for defending mistreated passengers. At one point, a young woman in a red scarf walked up to Calla in the airport lounge. She said in perfect English, "My aunt was the woman in that video." Then she handed Calla a folded napkin with 2 words written in pen, "Not again." Within 2 weeks, Ether launched its first ethics audit in the region. 2 carriers scored below the threshold. One tried to deny the results. The other quietly reached out. They wanted help rewriting their internal policies, wanted Ether's ethics algorithm installed, wanted Calla to train their staff directly. She flew out the next day. In her hotel room that night, Calla opened her laptop and saw an alert from her old GFIC server. International Aviation Consortium requests Ether as observer for non-charter enforcement roundtable. She blinked. They weren't ignoring her anymore. They were inviting her, not as Leona's daughter, not as the girl who got denied a first-class meal, but as someone who built something they couldn't shut down. She replied with 2 words, "I'll come," then closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city lights of a place that wasn't home, but felt true, and whispered, more to herself than anyone, "We're not just fixing flights anymore. We're changing who the skies belong to." 2 days later, she sat in a Jakarta media center, doing a live stream Q&A for the Ether launch. A teenage boy asked, "What would you say to someone who thinks nothing ever changes? That it's all just politics?" Calla smiled softly. "I'd say the girl they ignored for asking for a meal now writes the rules they have to follow. And sometimes, that's enough to start everything." The next day, Ether's first international ethics map went live. Every time an incident was flagged, language discrimination, class bias, unsafe offloads, it lit up in real time. The press called it radical transparency, but people called it hope. And across the world, a quiet shift began. Passengers spoke up, crew members whispered thank yous, airport managers reviewed their training logs, and on the tail of one long, silent plane that had denied dignity, a new decal appeared, monitored by Ether. The future was watching now, and her name was Calla. The tip came in through Ether's encrypted whistleblower portal. A single upload, no name, no message, just a file labeled Gray Line 31, not an error. Calla opened it in the Jakarta office after hours, lights low, the only sound the soft hum of the ethics map pulsing live on her second screen. It was footage, an internal cockpit camera, from a flight operated by a major transnational airline, the kind that had refused to sign onto the Drexler charter, the kind too rich, too old, too globally embedded to care about scrutiny. The video showed something she hadn't seen before, the deliberate downgrading of 5 ticketed first-class passengers during boarding. Not because of oversell, not because of weight balance, but because of a silent filter passed to the gate team, labeled sensitivity match. Calla froze the screen. At the top of the list, names, birth countries, accent risk level, high, regionalized. Seat reassignment directive, reclassify to economy quietly. If challenged, site maintenance. This wasn't clerical. It was algorithmic bias, systemized discrimination with zero human resistance, and it was running under the radar. She called Nisha, Ether's lead data integrity analyst, immediately. "What is Gray Line 31? Calla asked. Silence. Then Nisha's voice, low and tense. "It's a routing code, internal to the Trans-Allied Aviation Group. Gray Line means discretionary passenger demotion, outside regulation zones, and 31, that's their highest flag. It means auto-demotion based on predictive conflict score. Calla blinked. They're using predictive conflict to profile people before they even board? Yep, Nisha said. And we just got proof. Within 12 hours, Ether's team pulled together more evidence. Archived routing manifests, interview transcripts with off-the-record gate staff, a buried algorithm patent from a defunct partner tech firm, with one co-signer listed as R.L. Drexler. Calla stared at that name for a long time. R.L. Richard Leighton Drexler. Her grandfather, Leona's father. That night, Calla sat in her hotel room, documents spread across the bed, heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt since Zurich. She called her mother. Leona answered, but her voice was tight. You saw the name? Calla nodded slowly. Tell me it's not him. Leona didn't respond for a moment. Then softly, he was one of the earliest minds in predictive routing. What we didn't know, what I never knew, is that the patents were resold to TransAllied in 2008. Calla stood up. You helped build a framework to protect passengers, with systems he helped design to segregate them? Leona's voice broke slightly. I didn't know. I swear to you, Calla. I left that part of the family legacy behind. But they didn't, Calla whispered. And now they're using his system to dodge mine. The next morning, Ether's network flagged 37 new incidents tied to Gray Line codes, spanning 4 continents. The pressure built instantly. Journalists called. Donors froze funds, waiting for clarity. And Calla had to decide. Expose the algorithm, and by extension, her family's name, or stay quiet and protect the charter from legacy collapse. It wasn't just about ethics now. It was about identity. She called an emergency live stream from Ether's main office. No graphics, no makeup. Just her, raw and clear. She looked directly into the camera. My name is Calla Drexler, and the system we discovered this week was partially based on tech my own grandfather helped design. She paused. It was never meant to do good, and now it's doing harm, under the radar, across borders, to people who can't even fight back. So, we're naming it, we're tracing it, and we're dismantling it from the inside out. Then she announced the new campaign, #Ghost Codes. A live map of all known Gray Line deployments connected directly to Ether's alert system, and a coalition of data activists across 7 countries began organizing. What happened next surprised even Calla. 3 days after the video dropped, TransAllied's third-largest investor pulled $210 million in liquidity. The statement read, "We cannot fund systems designed to invisibly oppress. Ethics without transparency is just control." A week later, Leona stepped down from G5C to join Ether full-time. As senior architect of legacy code deconstruction, mother and daughter, fixing what their family once allowed. In a final press conference that month, a reporter asked Calla, "Do you ever wish your story stayed small? Just a girl denied a meal, and that was it?" She smiled. "I used to. But now I realize, some stories aren't just about you. They're about what happens when you refuse to stay quiet." The World Ethics Assembly hadn't convened like this in nearly 2 decades. Not since the early climate accords. Not since nations argued over data rights and drone warfare, and certainly never over airline treatment of passengers. Until now. Because this time, it wasn't just about passengers, it was about dignity infrastructure. The idea that access to the skies came with moral terms. And the person holding the pen? Calla Drexler, 25 years old. Not a politician, not a diplomat, but the architect of Ether, the Passenger Integrity Charter, and the woman who exposed Gray Line 31. The opening day took place at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. Security was tight. Media trucks lined the boulevard. Translation booths hummed above the chamber. Calla sat in the center of the floor, between the delegation from Kenya and the ethics chair of Japan. Leona, now Ether's senior ethics advisor, sat 1 row behind. And across the aisle, FalconEast, still dressed in suits, still smirking behind their polished ties. Calla didn't look their way. The moderator gave the floor to Ether for their final proposal. Calla stood, walked to the podium. Her voice was steady, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just real. Delegates, ministers, chairs. 5 years ago, I was denied a meal in first class. At the time, I thought it was about service. But what I learned, what millions saw with me, was that the deeper issue wasn't food. It was assumption, access, and unspoken power. She clicked the remote. The screen behind her showed the gray line 31 network map, 72 active routes, then shifted to the Ether ethics grid. Live, blinking, transparent. You cannot regulate what you refuse to measure, and you cannot protect dignity if the system is coded to erase it. So today, we propose a new framework, the Global Passenger Integrity Accord, a binding treaty that requires airlines and allied airports to adopt an ethics compliance infrastructure or face deregistration from international route sharing. Murmurs rippled through the room. Calla continued, "We are not here to punish. We are here to protect, because dignity isn't a policy. It's a right." Then she did something unexpected. She turned the screen again, showed her grandfather's name, Richard L. Drexler, and underneath, the patent. This system was born in shadow, and I'm here to say, we end that legacy today. With truth, not shame. With change, not silence. The room was still. Then the applause began. Not thunderous, but real. And across 36 nations, the vote lit up. Yes, 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 yes. Only 4 abstained. Yes, none opposed. The accord passed. And for the first time in history, the ethics of flight became law. In the weeks that followed, Ether expanded into 18 new countries. 7 airlines voluntarily integrated the grid. 3 were suspended after failing audit thresholds. Airports began installing live dignity indicators on public monitors, visible to passengers at check-in. One even displayed a daily quote from Calla's final speech. "Invisible harm is still harm, and justice begins where silence ends." Calla didn't tour, didn't give interviews. She went home, to a small lakeside town in northern Italy, quiet, unassuming, just beyond the radar. One morning, while feeding birds off her balcony, she heard a soft knock at the gate. It was the girl from the viral Dubai video, the one whose aunt had been denied boarding while holding a baby. She was older now, in college, and she said just this. She saw the treaty. She cried. Then she handed Calla a letter. Inside was a photo. The woman and her child, now 4, smiling in front of an airport screen that read, "Passenger dignity verified, Ether certified." Calla sat on the bench that evening, watching the water shift with the breeze. Leona joined her. They didn't speak for a while. Then Calla asked softly, "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Leona smiled. "No, but I always hoped you would." And in that moment, without ceremony or applause, the final piece settled. Calla hadn't just rewritten policy. She'd rewritten legacy, not by denying her roots, but by using them to grow something no one could uproot again. Epilogue, 3 months later. At an international tech expo in Nairobi, a 9-year-old girl walked up to a touchscreen booth titled, "Design the Future of Fair Flight." She drew a simple path. 1 gate, 1 plane, no color lines, no seat walls, and wrote, "Everyone gets to sit where they belong. Everyone gets to eat." The screen blinked, and in small blue text at the corner, the interface replied, "Thank you, Calla. If you could rewrite one rule in how the world treats people during travel, what would it be? Drop it in the comments and tell us where you're watching from." And from a junior policy analyst at a rival airline, mark my words, in 90 days, every carrier in the alliance will be scrambling to say they thought of it first. Back in her quiet hotel room, Henrietta tucked Walter in and placed her glasses on the nightstand. The lamp flickered low. Then she reached for one last note on her tablet. Ethics system reset. Initialized. It started with a ripple. By 9:15 a.m., IST, 24 hours after Sky North signed the DuPont Protocol, Aviajet, the second-largest transatlantic airline, issued a two-line press release. In solidarity with emerging ethics reforms, Aviajet will formally adopt the Passenger Ethics Accord effective immediately. No fanfare, no explanation, but it was enough to make markets twitch. An hour later, Transmercia Airlines followed. Then Coastal Link, then Union Air. By noon, Henrietta's inbox was pinging with blind copy confirmations from legal teams across 4 continents. Even Emerald Sky, the Asia-Pacific giant known for resisting any form of Western compliance, sent a discreet envoy to Geneva asking for preliminary implementation guidance. Within 36 hours, 17 carriers had either signed or declared intent to join. The media, of course, lost its mind. MSNBC ran a full panel segment called The Dignity Reset, How One Passenger Changed a $4 trillion Industry. On CNN, a former airline exec turned commentator said, Henrietta DuPont is now the quiet architect of aviation accountability. She didn't hold a press conference. She held the system hostage, with principles. The New York Times headlined, The Passenger Who Grounded the Industry. While Time magazine went one step further, cover photo, Henrietta in profile, soft smile, eyes calm. Caption, The Woman Who Made Airlines Kneel. In an ethics symposium in D.C., a transportation analyst shared, For decades, airlines self-policed. But the DuPont Accord does something regulators never could. It ties dignity to operation. You can't fly without proving you're fair. One airline whistleblower tweeted anonymously, We've been begging for this, screaming into the void. It took an elderly woman in 1A to do what 300 internal memos couldn't. Underneath, someone replied, She didn't scream. She tapped. Meanwhile, at Air Ethica's internal monitoring hub, a heat map showed a growing sea of green confirmations. One engineer whispered to her colleague, We just entered the cascade phase. Another muttered, The Accord's becoming the new passport. Henrietta's assistant, Lila, watched the chart unfold from a quiet room in Geneva. She broke the dam, Lila whispered. Now it floods. Behind closed doors, the CEOs of rival carriers tried to save face. One conference call included attempts to rename the protocol. Let's not call it DuPont. Maybe something more neutral like the Universal Passenger Charter. Discussions on how to spin compliance as innovation, panic about internal culture audits. One executive barked, We can't be seen as following Sky North. Position this as our own ethical initiative. Another muttered, Too late. She branded it in silence. Now even our silence sounds like hers. In Atlanta, a mid-level operations director at Air Converge called her team together. We're not waiting. As of today, we implement Tier 1 behavior evaluations on all international crew. Someone asked, Do we even have the systems? She replied, We have Zoom. We have common sense. We're out of excuses. And in Miami, a black grandmother named Ella Johnson watched the whole thing unfold on YouTube. She hadn't flown in 5 years after being yelled at on a flight for taking too long to sit down with her cane. Now, she leaned toward the screen and smiled. Bless that woman, she said. Bless her with both hands. But not everyone was cheering. In some boardrooms, old voices growled about overcorrection and optics-driven operations. One senior airline chairman called the Accord a PR stunt with teeth. But his COO cut him off. Sir, we lost 3 airport contracts this morning because we weren't DuPont certified. This isn't PR. This is oxygen. Back in Geneva, Henrietta sipped her tea, unread emails stacking up like leaves in autumn. She didn't need to read them. She already knew. The moment Sky North signed, the rest would fall, not out of virtue, but out of necessity. "You don't shift a glacier," she once told Lila. "You crack it once, and gravity does the rest." That evening, Walter turned to her on the balcony. 17 carriers? He asked. Henrietta nodded. "By tomorrow, 22. He chuckled. "You're going to rewrite the whole rule book." She paused. "No, I'm going to make them read the one they wrote, but never followed." He reached for her hand. "Still feel like staying quiet?" She smiled faintly, louder than ever. Far above them, jet trails crossed the evening sky, silent lines written in a language only time could read. But on the ground, the world was listening, and the message was clear. Dignity is not a luxury upgrade. It's the new boarding requirement. The Grand International Aviation Ethics Summit wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. Held once every 5 years in Montreal, it was a highly choreographed, invite-only event where CEOs posed for photos, regulators gave sanitized speeches, and ethics officers read carefully approved papers that no one remembered by lunch. The 2025 edition was expected to be no different, until Henrietta DuPont walked in. She arrived alone. No aides, no entourage. Just a single cream-colored folder in one hand and a brooch on her chest that shimmered under the hall's soft lighting, the emblem of Air Ethica, co-founded by her 23 years earlier. Most didn't notice her at first. She didn't come through the main stage entrance. She didn't wait for a speaking slot. She simply took a seat. Row 2, center. That seat, by coincidence or karma, had been reserved for the CEO of Sky North, who, 20 minutes earlier, had suddenly canceled his appearance. The ripple was instant. Whispers rolled like wind through wheat. "Is that her? DuPont's here? The DuPont protocol woman? What is she doing off stage?" The moderator looked nervous. The panelists, all senior airline executives, suddenly seemed a little smaller. The first presentation began. A well-dressed European CEO droned about collaborative ethics modeling. Another one presented slides titled "Passenger Perception versus Crew Performance, Bridging the Trust Gap." People kept glancing at Henrietta. She didn't take notes, didn't blink much, but her presence said everything. By the third panel, the tension cracked. A regulator from Singapore turned and asked directly, "Mrs. DuPont, would you like to comment?" There was a pause, not because people disapproved, but because everyone was silently hoping she would. Henrietta stood. No mic, no stage. She simply stood. The trust gap doesn't come from metrics. It comes from memory. Silence. People remember the time they were told to shut up, or to move, or to leave. They remember when no one helped, when silence spoke louder than slurs. And yet, here we are, discussing modeling frameworks for empathy. She paused. Dignity is not theoretical. It is not a spreadsheet cell. It is whether your mother would feel safe flying coach. The room held its breath. The moderator stammered a thank you, but Henrietta kept going. "I wrote the Passenger Ethics Accord not because I enjoy bureaucracy, but because I watched a system forget its soul. A system that could upgrade a meal before upgrading its manners. That could install facial recognition but not recognize fear." Then she held up the cream folder. "Inside this envelope is the finalized architecture for the Global Passenger Ethics Charter. It includes minimum standards, behavior audit protocols, and a zero retaliation clause for whistleblowers." She walked to the moderator's table and set the folder down. Any airline that signs it within 30 days will receive Air Ethica's full certification, partner endorsements, and platform integration access. Any airline that refuses will be listed publicly. Gasps. "This is not vengeance. It is maintenance of decency, of memory, of the right to board a flight without being shamed." The panel was over, but the summit wasn't. Over the next 12 hours, a line formed. CEOs, ethics officers, legal teams, all waiting to speak with the woman who, without a title or seat on stage, had just redrawn the map. Later that night, in her hotel room overlooking the St. Lawrence River, Henrietta finally sat alone, her shoes off, her scarf folded. Walter was asleep. On the desk in front of her were a dozen new messages. The FAA wanted a closed-door session. ICAO requested joint authorship on global standards. A major whistleblower group wanted to collaborate. Henrietta didn't open them right away. She simply looked out at the water and smiled. Because she hadn't needed a seat at the summit. She was the summit. 3 days after the Montreal summit, a silent storm moved into Washington, D.C. Inside FAA headquarters, on the 11th floor where only black badge security could access, a private no-record meeting was scheduled under the title Passenger Ethics Systems Integration Brief. But every person in that room knew who the meeting was really about. Henrietta DuPont didn't arrive with security, no PR rep, no spokesperson. She walked in carrying nothing but a cream folder and a reputation that now had regulators around the world scrambling to update their rule books. Seated across the oval table were top representatives from FAA, United States, DOT, Department of Transportation, ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, ESA, European Union Aviation Safety Agency, Civil Aviation Bureau of Japan, and 3 airline insurer consortiums. No press, no recordings, just decision makers, and one older woman in a charcoal gray blazer whose name was now whispered with both fear and admiration. FAA Deputy Director Milton Garver spoke first. Mrs. DuPont, we'd like to begin by saying, the summit made waves. There's no doubt your work is moving this industry forward. Henrietta didn't nod, didn't blink. Waves won't fix turbulence, Mr. Garver. Structure will. Without waiting, she placed a cream envelope on the table and opened it slowly. This is the operational framework for the Global Passenger Ethics Charter. It includes crew behavior scoring, passenger treatment audits, a zero retaliation policy for whistleblowers, and mandatory real-time reporting to Air Ethica's Gateway network. One of the Japanese officials leaned forward. And if an airline refuses? Henrietta looked directly at him. Then they forfeit ethics compliance status, which means, beginning Q4, they lose underwriting coverage from 3 of the 5 global insurers. Everyone went still. You can't enforce that, someone from the EU delegation muttered. No, Henrietta replied. The market will. The leverage was undeniable. Over the last 72 hours, 3 major insurers had quietly announced updates to their risk assessment standards, citing the DuPont Index as a required benchmark. The index wasn't just a scoring tool now. It had become a gatekeeper. If a plane mistreats a disabled veteran, or an unaccompanied child, or forcibly moves an elderly couple because a VIP wants their seat, there will be consequences. Consequences with financial teeth. Deputy Director Garver raised a brow. Are you proposing this be folded into FAA certification requirements? No, Henrietta said calmly. I'm expecting it. The charter won't replace your systems. It enhances them. If the FAA adopts it, it becomes policy. If not, it becomes the standard by which passengers measure your failure. Someone from ICAO tried a softer angle. You're aware, of course, that some of these clauses challenge cultural norms in certain regions. Public apology mandates, crew demotion transparency. Henrietta didn't flinch. Dignity is not cultural, it's universal. If a system can apologize when the drink cart is late, it can apologize when it wrongs someone's mother. Silence again. It was no longer just about ethics. It was about legacy, and no one in that room wanted to be the one who stood in the way of it. While that meeting unfolded in D.C., the consequences of inaction had already begun to take root. In Berlin, a leaked email revealed Sky North's panic memo. Delay implementation of charter clauses equals 12M in policy exposure. In Singapore, an anonymous flight attendant posted a video explaining how Air Ethica's behavioral tracking platform had saved her from retaliation after reporting racism on board. In New York, 3 high-profile class action suits suddenly shifted strategy. basing their legal arguments on non-compliance with DuPont charter expectations, making ethics a litigation standard. The ripple was now a wave. Back in Washington, the FAA's internal legal counsel had seen enough. They turned to Garver. If we don't align with this, we're exposing the agency to credibility collapse. She's built a parallel ethics system, backed by insurers, courts, and now media. The question isn't whether we agree, it's whether we catch up in time. Henrietta remained silent. She had said what needed to be said. Now it was their turn to catch up. Garver folded his hands. What exactly do you want from us, Henrietta? Clarity, she replied. I want full integration of the charter into all U.S. airline certification reviews starting Q4. I want ethics compliance to be publicly accessible. Crew behavior audits, passenger complaint resolutions, response time tracking. And I want your name on it, not mine. That caught people off guard. You don't want credit? Henrietta smiled softly. No one listens to old women. They listen to systems. Give them a system, and make sure it remembers what people felt, not just what they signed. Within 48 hours, the FAA quietly issued an interagency bulletin titled Advisory on Passenger Rights Harmonization, DuPont Framework Recognition. It wasn't flashy. No press conference, no official announcement. But it was real. And then came the leak. A journalist from the Atlantic Ledger got hold of the FAA's bulletin and published a piece titled, The Woman Who Made the Skies Fair Again. The article went viral. By morning, headlines around the world blared, FAA embraces DuPont's ethics charter. Airlines given 60 days to comply or face loss of insurance. Retired airline founder quietly redefines air travel norms. Henrietta, meanwhile, was back in Geneva, sitting on her patio, tea in hand. Walter reading beside her. Lila came out with a tablet, looking anxious. They want you on CNN, BBC. The Guardian wants a front-page op-ed. Say no. You sure? This is your moment. Henrietta stirred her tea. This isn't a moment. It's a repair. Let them celebrate what's changed. But they don't need to see who changed it. In Los Angeles, a mid-level airline ethics officer named Claudia Montez had just gotten off a call with her CEO. He looked shell-shocked. We're rewriting policy manuals. DuPont standard. Top-down review. If we don't, we lose Heathrow and JFK access. And they said we'll be publicly listed as ethics non-compliant on the AirEthica platform next month. Across 6 countries, 7 airlines announced emergency compliance meetings. At O'Hare Airport, a large touchscreen was installed at Gate B19. Real-time ethics status. Charter compliant. Crew grade. A. Passengers started noticing. Then asking questions. Then choosing flights differently. Back at her desk, Henrietta opened a message from the ESA chair. We are honored to adopt the Global Passenger Ethics Charter. You have changed aviation history. What shall we call this moment? She replied with one line. Don't call it anything. Just never forget why it was needed. A mother boards a flight in Boston with her young daughter. The flight attendant greets them warmly. No judgment, no sigh, just kindness. They pass a poster near the gate. Your flight, your dignity. In partnership with the DuPont Charter. Neither mother nor daughter knows the full story. But somewhere in Geneva, a retired founder stirs honey into her tea, knowing she didn't just build an airline. She restored humanity to the skies. Tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone silently shift the system? Not with anger, not with fame, but with sheer integrity. We'd love to hear your story below. It started with a headline, then another, then 20 more. The woman who silenced the skies. Henrietta DuPont, ethics architect of the air. From slap to system overhaul, the quiet power of one passenger. The world had finally discovered the name behind the charter, and they couldn't stop talking about her. Cable news anchors debated her legacy. Columnists praised her as the anti-CEO, someone who reshaped the system without chasing the spotlight. Twitter trended #DuPont Charter for a full week. Even late-night comedians mentioned her, but with rare reverence, calling her the grandmother of air justice. But in Geneva, Henrietta wasn't watching any of it. She was pruning roses. The irony wasn't lost on Lila, who sat across from her on the patio, reading aloud from the New York Times. She never raised her voice, never held a press conference, but she held the entire airline industry to account. Henrietta didn't look up from her tea. "They talk like I vanished into a cloud of smoke." "You kind of did," Lila replied with a grin. In the weeks following the charter's adoption, the offers came pouring in. Keynote speaker at the Global Aviation Forum in Abu Dhabi, honoree at the World Ethics Council Gala in Vienna, a federal board seat, a seven-figure book deal with the title already pre-approved, Altitude and Integrity. Henrietta turned down every one of them, not because she was shy, but because she understood something most people didn't. Once they make you the face of a system, they'll forget the system. "I built a framework," she told Walter one night, "not a brand." Still, her refusal only made the public more curious. Reporters camped outside her Geneva apartment. Producers from Netflix and HBO reached out, hoping to turn her into a series. Even her local grocery clerk had started whispering. She ignored it all. Of course, not everyone celebrated her. A few airline executives accused her of coercive lobbying. A conservative commentator on a U.S. news channel claimed the charter was a backdoor coup of regulatory power. Some crew unions pushed back at first, nervous about real-time scoring and passenger audits. Henrietta never responded, because the numbers already were. In the first 60 days, complaints dropped by 38%. Passenger altercations dropped 51%. Compliance with safety and fairness protocols rose over 70%. One CEO who had openly opposed the charter during the summit made an unexpected statement during a shareholder meeting. "We resisted accountability. Our competitors embraced it. They won." It was late October when Henrietta boarded a plane again. She was flying economy, Geneva to Toronto. Lila protested. "You do realize you could fly first class for free on 20 airlines now. Jet, private charter, helicopter if you asked." Henrietta smiled. "I want to see it from the same seat Walter and I always sat in, just once more." As she boarded, she noticed the crew. Their tone was measured, warm, but not performative. A flight attendant helped a nervous teenage girl without drawing attention. Another knelt down to speak gently with an elderly man who needed help adjusting his belt. A third offered water to a woman bouncing a fussy infant on her hip. No one asked Henrietta to move. No one questioned her presence. Mid-flight, the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to let you know this crew has been awarded an A+ rating on the DuPont Passenger Ethics Index. Thank you for flying with dignity." A soft round of applause followed. Henrietta didn't clap. She didn't need to. She simply rested her head back against the window and let the hum of the engine wash over her, not to fall asleep, but to feel something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. She had done it, quietly, thoroughly, completely. Back on the ground, others picked up where she left off. A young disability rights advocate in Chicago launched an airport accessibility charter modeled after the DuPont framework. A retired flight attendant created the International Crew Ethics Collective, offering training and resources to help cabin crews adapt and thrive under the new expectations. Law schools added the DuPont doctrine to their ethics curriculum. MBA programs wrote case studies about her decision to remain anonymous after impact. At JFK, a minimalist sculpture appeared outside Terminal 4, two bronze hands resting gently on a shared armrest. A plaque read, "Dedicated to Henrietta DuPont, who reminded us all how to sit with dignity." Henrietta never went to see it, but Lila did. She sent her a photo. Henrietta's reply was short. "Let the seat stay empty. It belongs to everyone." One early December morning, Walter found Henrietta in the garden planting winter roses. She was humming. He handed her a letter with the seal of the United Nations. "They want to nominate you," he said. "Humanitarian Service Medal." Henrietta stood, wiping dirt off her knees. "Tell them thank you, and that I already received my reward." Walter tilted his head. "And what was that?" Henrietta looked out across the lake. The sunlight touched the water just right. A system where my husband could board a plane, and no one would ever tell him to move again. It started as a quiet shift, barely noticeable at first. But 72 days after the DuPont Charter was adopted, the FAA and the International Civil Aviation Organization released a joint statement. The message was calm, professional, and almost bureaucratic in tone. Yet its weight was historic. Effective immediately, all airline certifications must meet and maintain a verified Passenger Fairness Index score. That meant every airline in the US, Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond now had to pass not only safety and technical audits, but ethical audits too. It was the first time in history that dignity had been made a condition of flight. The aviation world blinked. Some airlines welcomed the change, others panicked. A few fought back behind closed doors, sending lawyers and lobbyists to try to dilute the enforcement. But the momentum was already too strong. The public had tasted transparency, the idea that ethics could be measured, and that passengers had a right to humane treatment was no longer negotiable. Airports, too, began shifting. Boarding gates in major hubs like Frankfurt, Atlanta, and Singapore installed new signage. "This airline is PFI compliant." Passengers scanning their mobile tickets could see live data on crew behavior history, reported incidents, and response times to discrimination complaints. And people noticed. A single mother traveling with 3 children no longer received side eyes from staff. Elderly passengers didn't have to justify their need to sit next to their spouses. Ethnic minorities, once viewed with suspicion, were greeted with the same professionalism as anyone else. "You could feel it," one passenger told a reporter at LAX. "The temperature in the air changed, like someone turned down the judgment and turned up the respect." Lila watched it all unfold. From her kitchen table in Geneva, where fresh croissants cooled on a plate beside her, she read report after report. What touched her most were the emails from strangers. A flight attendant in training wrote, "We were shown a video of the DuPont incident. It's now mandatory learning. I just wanted to say thank you." A 16-year-old black boy from Detroit messaged, "I saw someone like me not get pulled for extra screening. First time ever. It's weird, but I felt normal." Even CEOs who once mocked the charter now scrambled to post about how their airlines were ahead of the curve. Henrietta didn't read the press, but she read the handwritten letters. Walter would bring them in from the mailbox, carefully sorted with his usual quiet reverence. He never opened them. That was her ritual. One letter was from a pilot. "I used to ignore things. I didn't want to rock the boat. But after what happened to you and your husband, I realized silence is complicity. I filed my first ethics complaint today." Henrietta read it twice, then placed it gently in a wooden box where she kept the letters that mattered most. The slap came without warning. It cracked across the first-class cabin like a gunshot. Sharp, stunning, loud enough to turn every head in row 1 through 6. Silverware paused midair, eyebrows lifted. A baby up in economy started to cry. 12-year-old Simone Caldwell sat frozen, her cheek blooming red, her body stiff against the plush leather seat. She didn't make a sound, didn't cry, didn't move, just stared forward, stunned. Her sister, Sierra, age 13, jolted. "What?" "I said sit properly," snapped the flight attendant, white, tight-bunned, and already stepping back as if what she'd done was routine discipline. Her name tag read Brenda C. Her voice dripped with authority. "She kicked the seat," Brenda added to no one in particular. "Children need to learn how to behave in premium cabins." Simone hadn't kicked anything. She'd tucked her feet up under her knees because the cold air was making her ankles numb. She hadn't said a word since boarding. Sierra looked to their grandmother sitting in 3A. Odessa Caldwell didn't say a word. She calmly reached into her structured gray tote, pulled out a soft travel blanket, and gently unfolded it across Simone's lap. Then, with a quiet click, she unsnapped the leather strap of a small, aged notebook, removed a slim pen, and began to write. Time code, 3:12 p.m. Pattern confirmed. Trigger condition met. No further verbal escalation required. She flipped the page, tore it out with care, and tucked it beneath her phone. Her expression didn't change. Behind them, the whispers started. She actually slapped her. Are they going to say anything? Where are the parents? We paid thousands for these seats, and this is what we get? No one stood up. No one intervened. Brenda cleared her throat and looked directly at Odessa. Is there a problem here, ma'am? Odessa looked up, her voice cool. None at all. Brenda gave a tight-lipped smile and turned away. Sierra leaned in, her voice shaking. Grandma, she hit Simone. You saw that, right? You heard what she said, like we don't belong here. I heard. And you're just gonna let that go? Odessa folded her notebook slowly. I didn't say that. Simone sat rigid, the blanket now clutched in her fists. Her eyes were glossy, but she refused to let the tears fall. Sierra's hands trembled with fury. We should call Dad, Sierra whispered. Right now. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Not yet, Odessa said, eyes focused out the window. Not yet. This is a whole emergency. Odessa finally turned to her. Do you trust me? Sierra hesitated, then nodded. Good. Then sit tall, chin up. She already slapped your sister. Don't let her see she took your dignity too. And that was the end of it. For now. Tell us where you're watching from. And what would you do if your granddaughter got slapped in first class, in front of the entire cabin? The rest of the flight passed in a kind of suspended silence. Passengers avoided eye contact. The woman across the aisle shifted her Hermes scarf and turned her shoulder toward the window. The man next to her buried himself in a copy of The Economist. No one asked Simone if she was okay. No one offered an apology. When drink service rolled around, Brenda skipped row 3 entirely. Odessa didn't seem to mind. She sat poised, hands folded over the notebook now closed tight on her tray table. From time to time, she glanced at her phone, not to text or scroll, but to watch the blinking green indicator on an encrypted app at the bottom of her home screen. It had turned yellow. Soon, it would turn red. Sierra stared at her grandmother. She didn't understand what any of this meant, but she'd seen that look before. Odessa Caldwell wasn't just a retired school teacher or someone's sweet, quiet nana. She had another name once. One not used in public. One attached to boardrooms and policy briefings and discreet power. Back home in Bethesda, there were entire drawers in the guest room that Sierra and Simone weren't allowed to open. Odessa had a study with 2 locks and a direct line to someone named only Marcel, a call she never made, until now. At 3:26 p.m., Odessa adjusted her scarf, checked her seatbelt, and tapped a single line on her phone. Activate Ledger Protocol 91C. The screen blinked once, then went black. They landed at San Francisco International in silence. No one applauded. No one made eye contact. Brenda stood stiffly at the front, thanking passengers as they disembarked, avoiding row 3 entirely. As Odessa, Sierra, and Simone stepped onto the jet bridge, a man in a charcoal suit stood waiting. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He handed Odessa an envelope. Inside, a printed terminal code, a confirmation ID, and a response line that read, Black flag clause acknowledged. Freeze initiated. Estimated impact, $940 million. Odessa tucked it into her purse like a grocery list. Sierra finally whispered, Grandma, what did you do? Odessa placed a hand on each girl's back and gently guided them forward. I didn't do anything, she smiled faintly. I just let the system catch up with itself. By the time they reached baggage claim, The ripple had already begun. Inside Terminal G, Odessa, Sierra, and Simone walked in silence, surrounded by the usual hum of travelers and echoing luggage wheels. The noise around them felt oddly distant, like it was happening in another world. Sierra kept glancing at her phone. "Still nothing in the news," she whispered. "It wouldn't be news," Odessa replied, calmly adjusting her gloves. "Not yet." Simone still hadn't spoken since the slap. She trailed just behind them, her posture guarded, arms crossed over her stomach like she was trying to shrink out of view. Odessa didn't force a conversation. She knew what that silence meant. Shame worked its way into children differently. It didn't just bruise the skin. It folded itself into their sense of worth, of belonging. Not this time. 30 minutes earlier in Manhattan, thousands of miles away, a quiet storm had started. A red flag alert blinked on the ethics risk dashboard at the New York headquarters of Fair Sky Ledger. A young analyst named Malik Osei sat up straight, nearly spilling his coffee. He leaned forward to double-check the origin tag. Protocol 91C, triggered by Caldwell O. Priority immediate. He barely had time to process before the director of ethics response, Evan Cho, stepped into the room. "She pulled it," Evan asked. "Confirmed. From in-flight." Evan didn't blink. "Get legal. Initiate ledger lockdown for all 5 affiliates, Sky North first." Within 5 minutes, an invisible cascade began. Ethics scores dropped. 5 airlines, including Sky North, saw their compliance ratings fall beneath the sustainability benchmark. That triggered an automatic freeze of $940 million across multiple ESG credit lines. 2 international investment consortia delisted the affected airlines. Insurance partners requested emergency reevaluations, and none of the airlines saw it coming. All because of one clause, hidden deep in the framework of the Fair Sky Ledger. A clause no one ever believed would be used. Until now. Back in San Francisco, Odessa calmly checked her phone. A small green badge glowed faintly. Freeze active. Monitoring phase. She placed the device back into her coat pocket and looked toward her granddaughters. Sierra had been watching her. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face was different now. More curious than confused. Like she was beginning to understand there was more to her grandmother than cardigans and peppermint tea. Odessa gave a small nod. "You both asked why I didn't yell," she said quietly. "Why I didn't confront that woman in the aisle." Simone looked up for the first time since they landed. Sierra stayed close. Odessa continued, "Because when you know what system you're inside of, and you helped build it, you don't have to yell, you just have to signal it." They made their way to the car, and Sierra still looked unsure. "So, that phone? That tap you did on the plane, what exactly did it do?" "It began a correction," Odessa said. "A long time coming." The ride to their hotel, the Grantham, was quiet but smooth. As the car pulled up to the entrance, a doorman stepped forward and tipped his hat. "Welcome back, Ms. Caldwell," he said warmly. Sierra blinked. "Wait, you've been here before?" "Many times," Odessa replied, as if it weren't worth noting. "I used to attend ethics board meetings nearby." Simone squinted. "You were on the board?" Odessa gave a gentle chuckle. "No, baby, I wrote the board." Inside Sky North's corporate tower, chaos was unfolding. CEO Craig Halden was in his corner office, red-faced and furious. He stood over a young legal officer who was reading from a printed memo with shaking hands. "This can't be real," Craig said. "They can't just freeze funding." "They can," the lawyer said. "They did." Craig stormed to his screen. "Who the hell is behind this?" The legal officer clicked into the metadata on the protocol. A name popped up, Odessa Caldwell. Beneath it, her previous title, Senior Ethics Risk Director, Global Investment Council. Founder of the Passenger Equity Framework. Protocol architect of the very system Sky North had signed into 3 years ago to attract sustainable investors. "She wrote the system," the lawyer muttered, stunned. She's not just a passenger. She's the route authority. Craig stared at the screen, cold sweat rising on the back of his neck. So she can shut it all down? She already did. At the Grantham, Odessa took her tea quietly in the lounge while Sierra paced nearby. You really made that thing? The whole Fair Sky system? Sierra asked. Why didn't you ever tell us? Odessa looked up. Because I didn't build it to talk about. I built it to protect people who don't always get to sit in first class without someone asking why they're there. Simone leaned forward, finally finding her voice. So what happens now? Odessa smiled, small and certain. Now the industry scrambles to explain why their ethics score suddenly dropped. Investors start calling, journalists sniff around, and the FAA quietly reopens the passenger equity framework they buried 3 years ago. You're going to go public with this? Sierra asked. No, Odessa said. That's not necessary. The consequence is already moving. And besides, she picked up her notebook. Real correction doesn't need headlines. It just needs pressure in the right places. That same evening, 3,000 miles away in D.C., the FAA received an encrypted draft of a 54-page proposal, an old document revived from their archives. Title: Passenger Equity Framework. Draft Review. Author: Caldwell, O. It had been shelved, dismissed as too ambitious, too radical. Now it had teeth, and the industry was listening. Back in her room, Odessa stood on the balcony as the city lights flickered to life. Her granddaughters were asleep in the suite behind her. She held her notebook, turned to a new page, and wrote in her careful hand, "One strike, one signal, and the system reboots. This time, they'll remember the silence." She tore out the page, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the leather folder labeled Passenger Equity, Active Case, Caldwell. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be calls, but tonight, there was peace, and that was enough. The next morning, Odessa was already up before the sun. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her notebook open in her lap, steam rising gently from a cup of jasmine tea beside her. Sierra and Simone were still asleep, curled up under the soft white blankets in the other room. The silence gave her space to think, but it wouldn't last long. She flipped a page and read over her notes from the night before. Every line was purposeful, every phrase sharp like a scalpel. Odessa had been in too many boardrooms to leave anything vague, especially now. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text or call. It was a system ping from Fair Sky's internal alert chain, the kind that only final node authorities received. She tapped to open it. Subject: Emergency Ethics Rating Deviation Review affected. Sky North Airline status. Preliminary suspension pending multi-sector investigation authority source. Caldwell, O. The investigation had started. She exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but because she knew exactly what came next. Across town, Sierra and Simone were sitting on the hotel room couch, each with a bowl of cereal in their lap. The morning news was playing on mute on the flat-screen TV, but the headlines were loud enough. ESG meltdown, 940 LM frozen as Sky North ethics score crashes overnight. Anonymous passenger triggers systemic audit. Sources say high-level insider behind it. Sierra squinted. They don't even know it's you. Odessa walked out from the bedroom, tying her silk robe. They will, she said simply. Are you going to tell them? No, Odessa replied. I'm going to show them. Later that morning, a car picked them up from the hotel. Odessa had a meeting at the Bayview Institute, an old policy think tank tucked into the hills above San Francisco. She'd spoken there before, but today's meeting wasn't scheduled. She was calling it herself. The director, Martin Shu, greeted her at the front desk. Odessa, he said, slightly breathless. I figured you'd be coming. He led her to a small conference room with glass walls. I've already cleared the schedule. You'll have total discretion over what gets shared. This thing you started, it's gone nuclear. Odessa sat down, placed her leather folder on the table, and opened it calmly. I didn't start it, she said. "Barbara Reynolds did when she slapped my granddaughter. All I did was answer the system I built." Martin leaned in. "We've had calls from FAA, from the EU Transport Authority, even 2 UN observers. You just triggered a global shift." Odessa nodded. "Good. Let's give it shape." Back at Sky North's headquarters, the C-suite was melting down. "Shut it down," Craig Halden barked. "I don't care if you have to bribe someone. Get this ledger nonsense reversed." His chief legal officer leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You still don't get it. You signed your soul to her system when you begged for that green rating 2 years ago. There's no shutting it down. This isn't just about Fair Sky. It's about every bank, insurer, and port that uses their compliance framework. So we're blacklisted? You're ethically insolvent." Craig turned to the window, staring out at the skyline. "Then we need to find her, whoever she is." The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a printed document from his briefcase. "She's not hard to find," he said. "Her name's on every line of this protocol." Craig read the name aloud. "Odessa Caldwell." He blinked, then paused. "Wait, that name sounds familiar." The lawyer nodded. "She's the same woman who blocked the NovaJet merger in 2019 because of unethical crew policies. She's been shaping policy behind the scenes for 2 decades. Craig dropped the paper. "Oh God," he muttered. "We slapped the ethics czar's grandkids." Back in San Francisco, Odessa stood at a podium in the Bayview Institute's small auditorium. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't have to. Every word hit like a bell. When a black child is slapped in first class and no one intervenes, that's not just rudeness, that's infrastructure, she said. It's the consequence of design, of unchecked power that thinks seats are owned by faces, not tickets. People nodded. Some clapped. But Odessa wasn't there for applause. She clicked her remote and changed the slide on the screen behind her. The Passenger Equity Framework, Full Activation Plan. A 4-phase roadmap that integrated ethics compliance into the very backbone of airline operation. Real-time behavior monitoring, crew and passenger. Ethics score, integration with insurance and credit access, flight. Eligibility, restrictions for low-score operators, public disclosure of violations and corrective measures. She turned back to the room. "This isn't a threat," she said calmly. "It's an overdue upgrade. The industry can either adapt or get left on the tarmac." 1 hour later, video clips from the talk began circulating online. The name Odessa Caldwell started trending. Within 3 hours, 3 investor coalitions began divesting from Sky North. One of them, Horizon Capital, published a brief. "We were made aware that the ethics compliance failure stemmed from the mistreatment of 2 young passengers of color. We are redirecting all aviation investments to airlines that meet the passenger equity baseline." Back in the hotel suite, Sierra watched the news with wide eyes. "They know it's you now." Odessa sat down beside her. "They know who I am," she said, sipping her tea. "But more importantly, they know what comes next." Simone, sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispered, "Are they scared?" Odessa didn't answer immediately. Then, "They should be." That evening, a special closed-door meeting was convened at FAA headquarters. 4 senior administrators sat around a long oak table. One of them, a woman named Darla Reyes, held up her tablet. "This is the problem," she said. "She's not just a whistleblower. She's the engineer. She has built-in authority, and she has the public's trust." Another official asked, "Do we fight this or follow her lead?" Darla looked out the window, then back at her tablet. "She gave us the framework 3 years ago," she said. "We ignored it. Now she's proving we can't." By the end of the night, 3 countries had signaled interest in adopting parts of Odessa's framework. The dominoes were falling. And Odessa? She was back on the balcony, staring into the dark sky. Sierra walked up beside her, holding her phone. "Grandma," she said softly, "there's a video going viral. Some random passenger filmed the slap. It's out now. People are mad. Odessa nodded, watching the moonlight cut across the city skyline. "Good," she said. "Let them be." She didn't need to go viral. But the truth? That needed to fly. The newsroom at Channel 6 wasn't built for chaos, but by 10:04 a.m., chaos had taken a seat and poured itself coffee. Okay, who is she? Is the slap video real? Wait, $940 million. Froze. What the hell is the Fair Sky Ledger? Producers darted between desks like bees in a storm, phones glued to their ears. They weren't chasing a story. The story was chasing them. In a corner booth near the back, Selena Torres, the network's senior ethics correspondent, stared at a grainy still image pulled from the viral video. Two young black girls in first class, one flinching, one reaching toward her sister, and a flight attendant mid-slap, her hand blurred from motion. Selena narrowed her eyes at the timestamp. 07:49 a.m. Gate 32A, Sky North Flight 1182. She didn't need confirmation. She recognized the posture in that hand. It was the same airline whose CEO once told her off-record, "These ESG scores are a fad. What matters is seat fill." Well, now the seats were empty. She typed 3 words into a search bar. Odessa Caldwell Ethics. And there it was. A decade of policy drafts. Closed-door testimony before Senate committees. Founding chair of the Ethics Viability Index. Whispers of a system used quietly across 7 banks and 2 international lending boards. Selena exhaled. We slapped the woman who writes the rules. 10 minutes later, her segment aired live. Sources now confirm the woman behind the viral airline ethics freeze is Odessa Caldwell, a former ethics risk director with control authority over the Fair Sky Ledger, a platform that determines credit eligibility for multi-billion-dollar transportation investments. Her granddaughters were the victims in the now infamous first-class incident. And the consequences? We're already seeing them. The clip went global in under 30 minutes. Hashtags exploded. He wrote the rules. Odessa Caldwell. Guy. North exposed. Meanwhile, in a plush boardroom 5 floors above Sky North's corporate lobby, CEO Craig Halden sat pale, surrounded by legal counsel and crisis PR. "Get her on the phone," he barked. "We need to apologize. Issue a press statement. Offer her a settlement." His general counsel gave him a look. "Craig, she doesn't want your apology." "Then what the hell does she want?" "She wants the entire industry to change." Silence. One junior VP whispered, "She can't actually freeze the banks, right?" Everyone turned. "She didn't freeze the banks," the general counsel said. "She froze the rating that underwrites the banks. The system reacted, automatically. That's what happens when the ethics score drops below 42.3. The room went quiet again. Craig stood up, pacing. "So, what now?" His legal advisor just said, "Now, we wait for her to move again." Odessa didn't go on TV. She didn't make a statement. She simply uploaded a document. It was a 27-page white paper titled, "The Passenger Equity Framework, Emergency Implementation Protocol." No bold fonts, no drama. Just policy. But within 4 hours, 6 domestic airlines received a notification that unless they signed acknowledgement of the framework's principles, their access to Fair Sky-linked credit facilities would be suspended within 14 business days. By 5 p.m., 3 of them signed. Sky North refused. They issued a press release that read, "We are committed to fairness and integrity, but we do not respond to coercion or viral pressure tactics." The internet lit up. Sierra and Simone sat on the hotel bed, watching TikToks of people mocking the statement. One showed a fake CJ CEO trying to staple dollar bills back into an unplugged ATM machine labeled Sky North. Sierra giggled, but Simone stayed quiet. "Grandma's not going to let this go, is she?" she asked. Sierra shook her head. "Would you?" "No," Simone said, "but I'd be scared." Sierra nodded slowly. "I think she is scared, just not in the way they think." That night, Odessa received a call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Then a text came through, FAA Administrator Darla Reyes. "We need to meet, in person, tomorrow. You choose location." Odessa stared at the message, then walked over to her bookshelf, pulled down a small dust-covered binder, Equity Emergency Playbook. She wrote one sentence in the margins. Day 2, they finally admit the system matters. At FAA headquarters the next morning, Odessa sat across from Darla Reyes and 2 policy heads. No lawyers, no press. Just people who'd worked in the system long enough to know it was rotting from inside. Darla leaned forward. "You've turned the spotlight onto something we ignored for years. You built it, you warned us, and now you've shown us what happens when it's not followed." Odessa didn't smile. She just opened a folder and slid over a document labeled Phase 2, Crew Conduct Transparency Index. "This goes beyond investment ratings," she said. "It's time airlines are scored the way students are graded, on conduct." Darla flipped through the proposal. "What's this clause?" she asked. "Retroactive score degradation?" Odessa nodded. "For every verified incident in the last 5 years that was covered up, minimized, or denied, each drops your score by 2.4 points. We don't just punish future violations, we clear the backlog. And if the airlines refuse?" Odessa folded her hands. "Then the investors will, and the airports will, and the international regulators already watching from London to Sydney will move without waiting." Darla looked down at the folder. "This will change everything." Odessa finally smiled. "That's the point." By evening, 5 more airlines had signed early access letters to the new passenger equity framework. 2 banks publicly endorsed the rating recalibration. One insurer, Eastern Horizon Capital, announced they would no longer underwrite any flight operations with a Fair Sky Ethics score under 70. Sky North's was currently at 36. Their stock dropped 11% in a day. Inside a dimly lit crisis war room, Craig Halden stared at a blank document on his laptop. "We need a statement," his communications director said softly. Craig tapped the keyboard, then stopped. "What the hell do you even say to someone who just dismantled your company with one report?" No one answered. Outside, the media vans lined up. Inside, the system reset had already begun. And somewhere across town, in a quiet hotel room, Simone climbed into bed beside Sierra. "She's really doing it," she whispered. Sierra nodded. "She's rewriting the rules." Odessa, in the next room, heard them through the thin wall. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. She simply whispered to herself, "Let the skies be fair again." The next morning, the world woke up to a headline that stopped people mid-sip. FAA confirms industry ethics probe, passenger equity framework, now mandatory for federal compliance. The announcement wasn't just about Odessa Caldwell anymore. This was bigger, systemic, structural. Airlines weren't just dealing with a PR crisis, they were dealing with a regime change. And at the center of it stood a grandmother who hadn't raised her voice once. At Sky North headquarters, panic settled into something worse: silence. Departments were told not to speak to press. Employees were instructed to scrub mentions of internal complaints. HR teams were working overtime to figure out how many unresolved racial discrimination reports might now be used to drag their ethics score even lower. Inside the legal wing, a wall of whiteboards tracked every clause in Odessa's framework. Craig Halden stared at a flashing red box. Retroactive score degradation, pending evaluation of 74 incidents. "What happens if we drop below 30? He asked, voice hoarse. One of the analysts spoke up quietly. "Then we lose our route certifications in Canada and the EU. FAA flags us for ethical non-compliance. Insurance premiums quadruple. Credit access halts entirely." He didn't reply. At the Bayview Institute, Odessa sat calmly at a policy roundtable. "You've triggered a full recalibration," said Professor Elaine Chambers. "And not just in the US. International unions are watching. Odessa nodded. They were always watching, just waiting for someone to make the first irreversible move. Are you prepared for the retaliation? Odessa looked around the table. They already slapped my granddaughters in public. What's left? Someone murmured. They'll go after your history. Discredit the ledger, paint you as a relic. Odessa smiled. Let them. I wrote every clause in that system with independent third-party validation. For every attack, there's a timestamp. Meanwhile, at News One Global, anchors prepared for a live sit-down interview with Simone and Sierra Caldwell. It wasn't Odessa's idea. It was the girls'. Sierra had said, if they hear from us, maybe they'll stop saying she overreacted. Simone added, and maybe they'll believe this wasn't just about one slap. The cameras rolled. The interviewer smiled. Can you tell us what happened on that flight? Sierra looked down, then up. It wasn't just the slap. It was the way she looked at us, like we didn't belong there, like the seat wasn't really ours. Simone added, and when we said we did belong, she laughed, like it was funny. And now? The interviewer asked softly. Sierra looked directly into the camera. Now they know who we are. The segment aired in over 70 countries. Clips went viral again, but this time, not of violence, of resolve. Odessa didn't need to say a word. At FAA headquarters, Administrator Darla Reyes held a joint press briefing. Effective immediately, all commercial passenger airlines operating within U.S. airspace must comply with the Passenger Equity Framework. Failure to maintain a minimum ethics score of 65 will trigger automatic audits and potential suspension of route rights. This is not optional. This is the future. The news rippled across the industry. Stock analysts called it the ethics reckoning. Passengers started asking airlines for their Fair Sky scores before booking flights. One video showed a man at the check-in desk asking, "Wait, what's your ethics rating again? 'Cause I'm not flying with anyone under 70. I got kids with me." By day 3, 5 major airlines signed the full passenger equity charter. Sky North still hadn't. Instead, they issued a second press statement. We remain committed to fairness, but reserve our right to challenge unethical mandates imposed by private entities acting outside legislative authority. It backfired instantly. Within hours, screenshots surfaced from former Sky North employees. Internal memos denying bias claims. Whistleblower complaints ignored. DEI proposals shut down without discussion. Someone even leaked a call recording of a senior exec saying, "We'll sign it when hell freezes over." Odessa didn't comment. She didn't need to. The system had already begun to eat its own. In a closed-door Senate Ethics Committee hearing, Odessa sat across from several skeptical lawmakers. One leaned in. "Mrs. Caldwell, are you suggesting private industry system should dictate federal aviation policy?" Odessa answered, voice steady. "No, Senator. I'm saying your federal aviation policy failed to protect passengers from industry abuse, so we built a system that would." Another senator asked, "And what gives you the authority?" Odessa replied without blinking. "The results. When 5 airlines raise standards, 2 banks freeze unethical access, and the public demands better. That's not power. That's accountability." The room fell quiet. Later that evening, in her hotel suite, Odessa took a call. It was Craig Halden. He sounded tired, hollow. "I want to meet," he said. "Not on camera, not with lawyers, just you and me." Odessa hesitated. "Why?" "Because I have daughters too," he said. "And I think I just learned what it means to be ashamed of myself." There was a long pause. Odessa answered quietly. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., no cameras, no excuses." The next morning, they met in a quiet room at the Federal Ethics Mediation Center. Craig sat down, hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know who you were," he started. Odessa replied, "That's exactly the problem." He swallowed hard. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a path forward, something we can do, publicly." Odessa slid a document across the table. It was titled, "The Fair Sky Redemption Protocol, Terms for Public Industry Rehabilitation." "I don't want revenge," she said. I want prevention. Craig stared at the paper. You're offering me a second chance? No, she said. I'm offering your passengers one. Whether you earn it is up to you. He nodded slowly. I'll sign. Odessa stood. Then we begin tomorrow. By the end of the week, Sky North became the last of the top 7 carriers to sign the charter. They held a press conference, not to defend themselves, but to announce sweeping reforms, a full internal audit of historical complaints, public publishing of monthly ethics scores, onboard reporting tools for passengers, mandatory retraining for all flight crew, and a $50 million donation to fund the Passenger Dignity Education Initiative. The world didn't cheer, it watched. But for Odessa, it wasn't about applause. It was about the silence afterward. That stillness when justice, at last, feels like a full breath. Simone hugged her tightly that night. You did it, Grandma. Odessa smiled softly. No, baby, we did. And far above them, planes crossed the night sky, still flying, but no longer unchecked. 3 days after Sky North signed the charter, a quiet ripple turned into a wave. The Wall Street Observer ran the headline first. Fair Sky Ledger ratings go public. Investors begin divesting from low-scoring airlines. And just like that, what began as a moral reckoning became a financial one. By 11 a.m., $412 million had been pulled from 3 major airlines whose ethics scores dropped below 60. By 2 p.m., 2 investment consortia announced they would only back transportation companies compliant with the passenger equity framework. And by nightfall, Black Flag Clause 4.3, the clause Odessa had written 12 years ago, was invoked in full. It froze nearly $940 million in revolving credit lines. The media dubbed it the ethics freeze. But Odessa Caldwell didn't call it that. She called it maintenance. Meanwhile, Sierra and Simone were quietly ushered out of the spotlight. Odessa had seen the early signs, comment sections turning from support to scrutiny. She's exploiting those girls for media gain. They're teenagers. This is too much for them. So, Odessa pulled them back. Not because the critics were right, but because the girls deserved a normal Wednesday more than they needed another headline. She handed them phones, turned off press notifications, and told them, they already saw your strength. Now go be kids again. That night, the girls stayed up late watching cartoons. No hashtags, no trending tags, just popcorn. Inside the FAA, a war was brewing. Not against Odessa, against the silence. For years, the agency had quietly let airlines regulate themselves, evaluating complaints in-house, running DEI initiatives as optional side projects. But now the world was watching. Internal emails showed disagreements on how to proceed. Some senior officials wanted to endorse Fair Sky fully. Others wanted to audit it. One director wrote, "It's either us or them. If we don't lead the ethics framework, private systems will." But the truth was, Fair Sky Ledger wasn't just a system anymore. It had become a standard. And Odessa? She had become something else entirely, unavoidable. In a quiet Washington restaurant, Odessa met with Marlene Zhu, executive chair of Trans-Allied Holdings, a multinational investment body with over $200 billion under management. "I'll be brief," Marlene said, setting down a leather folder. "We're pulling $190 million from Air Nova and transferring our portfolio to certified carriers." Odessa blinked. "That's fast." Marlene leaned in. "Ethics is the new capital, and we're not in the business of betting on instability." Then she paused. "But I want to go further." Odessa raised an eyebrow. Marlene continued, "We want to partner with Fair Sky, fund expansion, make it a global system." Odessa didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "I built Fair Sky, so we wouldn't need private leverage to be treated with basic dignity, not to sell it off." Marlene smiled. "Not a buyout, a partnership. You stay in control." Odessa looked at the folder again. The first page read, "Proposal, International Passenger Ethics Accord. She closed the folder. I'll consider it, but on one condition. Name it. You don't get to shape the rules. You follow them, just like everyone else. Marlene nodded. Deal. The next morning, a notification came across Fair Sky's internal dashboard. New entry request. International certification interest. 21 carriers. Odessa stared at the screen. In 12 years, no one had asked for international implementation. Now, 21 carriers from 4 continents wanted in. She clicked Accept All, then walked to the window. The sun was just breaking over the skyline, and in that moment, it hit her. This isn't about what they did to us anymore. It's about what we do for those after us. Back at Sky North, a different meeting was taking place. Craig Halden stood before his board, flanked by a new chief ethics officer and a visibly uncomfortable legal team. I've called this session to announce a formal apology, he began. To every passenger we failed, and to the Caldwell family, whose pain forced us to confront what we refused to see. He turned to the screen behind him. It showed Sky North's updated passenger dignity plan. The room stayed silent as he went through the points. An independent ethics review board, real-time passenger dignity feedback via mobile apps, a standing seat for a passenger advocate on all major flight routes. One board member whispered, "This is a complete overhaul." Craig replied, "It's a start." And for once, no one argued. On the news that night, a familiar voice spoke on a podcast. Odessa Caldwell didn't destroy the airline industry. She reminded it of its obligations. She didn't cancel anyone. She calibrated a system. The voice belonged to Asha Ramani, a journalist once blacklisted for investigating discrimination at national carriers. Her podcast now hit number 3 on the global charts. The name of the episode? Slap Heard Around the Skies. Meanwhile, Odessa returned to her garden. No press, no podium, just roses. She pruned in silence, careful with the roots, gentle with the thorns. Sierra came outside, wiping her hands on a napkin. "We just saw you on TikTok. You're in a remix with Michelle Obama." Odessa laughed. "What's a remix?" Simone popped her head out. "It means you're a meme now. You've got theme music and everything." Odessa shook her head. Good Lord. But she was smiling, because she knew something they didn't. The work wasn't about noise. It was about seeds. And they were finally blooming. Across the country, parents began asking their kids what airline they'd flown on for field trips. Teachers started checking ethics scores before booking flights. Veterans groups requested protections in flight policies. And a bill was drafted in Congress to explore mandatory ethics certification for all public transit systems. Odessa didn't appear at the hearing. She didn't need to. Her name was in the footnotes of every clause. And when a reporter asked if she'd ever go public with Fair Sky, Odessa replied, "Fair Sky was never meant to make me rich. It was meant to keep us human." The reporter asked, "Do you think they'll forget what started it all?" Odessa smiled. "Only if they forget how it felt to be invisible." At 8:17 a.m. on a foggy Tuesday, Odessa Caldwell's name appeared on a Senate agenda. Item 4B, Proposed National Integration of the Passenger Equity Framework. It was the first time in 27 years that a civilian-led system, one not created by a government agency, was being considered for federal standardization across U.S. transportation sectors. Odessa didn't attend the hearing. She wasn't avoiding the spotlight. She was avoiding distraction. She knew how the system worked. The moment they made her the center of the story, they'd bury the system itself. So while senators debated, Odessa was in a conference room at the Center for Systems Ethics, sitting with her sleeves rolled up and her glasses halfway down her nose, reviewing a 92-page draft, Operational Readiness Criteria for Equity-Based Airspace Clearance. "This is dense," said Caleb Dwyer, the former CTO of Airfleet Logistics who now worked with Odessa's team. "Good," Odessa replied. "Systems should be dense. Being fair isn't about slogans. It's about infrastructure." Caleb smirked. You know the FAA's gonna fight this. I know, she said, turning the page. They've been fighting gravity too. It's not going well for them either. Back in D.C., the Senate hearing had turned, surprisingly, bipartisan. Senator Ramirez of California spoke first. My constituents include immigrants, seniors, veterans, and students. They all fly. They all deserve protection. Then, a Republican from Ohio surprised the room. I wasn't sold on this at first. Thought it was corporate overreach. But then my daughter told me about what happened to those girls, Simone and Sierra, and she asked, Dad, would they have slapped me too? I couldn't answer her. Silence fell. It wasn't the most eloquent speech, but it hit home. A vote was called, and in an 18-2 decision, the motion passed. Begin feasibility study to adopt the passenger equity framework as national baseline policy for federally certified carriers. It wasn't a law yet, but it was no longer just Odessa's fight. It belonged to the system now. By Wednesday, word had spread. News outlets ran with headlines like, Slap Sparks Senate Shake-Up. From Garden to Government, the Odessa Effect. The New Gold Standard. Ethics as Airspace Currency. At the Bayview Institute, where Fair Sky was headquartered, emails flooded in from organizations wanting to license the scoring system. Some were small bus lines, others were international cruise companies. Odessa's assistant came in, overwhelmed. We just got a request from the UN Transport Equity Division. Odessa didn't look up from her notepad. Tell them we'll send the API documentation, but the score parameters don't change, no matter how global this gets. Her assistant blinked. You're not going to negotiate? Odessa finally looked up. Dignity isn't a variable. Meanwhile, Simone and Sierra were being approached, again, by every brand imaginable. One makeup company wanted them for a Brave Beauty campaign. A luxury bag brand offered a 6-figure sponsorship. Odessa sat them down that evening over pasta and said, You don't owe the world anything right now. Sierra hesitated. But wouldn't it be powerful if we used our platform? Odessa smiled. It would, but powerful doesn't always mean healthy. Simone asked, What would you do? Odessa leaned back. I'd journal. I'd go quiet. I'd remember what happened, not just what it looked like. They nodded. Then Simone whispered, We could write? Odessa raised an eyebrow. Write? Yeah, like a story. Not for the news, just to tell it how we lived it. Odessa exhaled slowly. Now that's power. By Friday, the first outlines of what would become the Passenger Equity Act were drafted. Lawyers from Fair Sky collaborated with Senate aides to ensure protections were enforceable, not just performative. Clause 2.1 required airlines to submit quarterly dignity compliance reports. Clause 4.4 made ethics scores accessible via federal booking platforms. Clause 6.2 allowed passengers to challenge discriminatory treatment via a unified complaint pipeline with real-time case visibility. One senator called it the most concrete advancement in consumer air travel rights in 3 decades. But Odessa saw it differently. To her, it was long overdue maintenance. That night, Craig Halden, the CEO of Sky North, sat on a panel hosted by The Atlantic. He looked different, thinner, more measured. The moderator asked, If you could go back to that day, what would you do differently? Craig didn't blink. I'd have fired myself that morning, before Odessa had to do it for me. The moderator leaned in. Do you think Sky North will survive this? Craig shrugged. It's not about us surviving. It's about whether we've learned enough to deserve survival. A pause. Then, and for what it's worth, I thank her. Because she didn't destroy us. She forced us to become something we weren't brave enough to imagine. Back at home, Odessa received a simple package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a printed photo. It showed a flight crew, all smiles, standing next to a young girl in a wheelchair and her mother. On the back was a handwritten note. First time we weren't told to pre-board through the service door. Thank you for making us visible. Odessa stared at it for a long time. Then she walked to her office, opened a drawer, and slid the photo in. She had a section labeled Before and After. It was almost full now. Late that night, she stood at her window, looking out over the city. Sierra and Simone were asleep. The world was noisy again. Podcasts, news segments, hashtags. But she wasn't listening to any of it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to herself. Don't get addicted to being right. Stay addicted to doing right. She paused, then added, let systems serve people, not reputations. She saved the note and smiled, because tomorrow would bring another wave of meetings, another barrage of interviews, another headline. But tonight, she was just a grandmother, one who planted seeds, and finally saw them grow. Odessa woke before dawn again, drawn to her laptop by an email with the subject line, UN Transport Equity Division, request for immediate integration. She'd expected interest, but not this early. She clicked open the message, skimmed the diplomatic tone, then closed her eyes for a moment. 4 continents now wanted Fair Sky's passenger equity framework. 12 carriers had already applied for certification. 21 more were in the queue. Cruise lines, bus firms, even rail networks were asking for guidelines. It was surreal. A private system she'd built 10 years ago, quietly fermenting behind the scenes, was now being used to shape policies from New York to Nairobi. She hit Reply All and typed, we'll send API docs and implementation parameters by end of day. No adjustments to core ethics metric. Protocol 4.3 remains universal. Then she hit send and returned to her tea, letting the steam wake her senses. Soon enough, the world would merge around a simple principle. Dignity can't be optional. Later that morning, a small group of executives from Eurosky Holdings gathered in Barcelona. They'd been flying under a provisional Fair Sky rating of 68, just above the US minimum. Their CEO, Inés Delgado, pushed up her glasses as the statistics scrolled on a conference room screen. 14 confirmed passenger discrimination incidents in the last 24 months. 9 internal complaints inadequately addressed. A base ethics rating of 52.8, post-retroactive degradation. Not enough, Inés said. We need to sign the full charter, effective immediately. Her CFO, Luca Romano, frowned. But our North American routes, those airlines haven't fully complied yet. If we move too quickly, they'll outcompete us on pricing. Inés shook her head. If we don't lead, someone else will. Listen, TransAllied just pulled $190 million from Air Nova. They're going to fund our expansion if we commit now. This is our moment. Luca sighed. Fine, I'll draft the board resolution. Inés nodded, turning to her team. Let's get on the platform. By month's end, Eurosky will be the first European carrier to publish real-time ethics updates. Across the Pacific, in Sydney, executives from Outback Airways huddled around a video feed that showed Odessa speaking quietly at a policy roundtable 2 days ago. They'd been hesitant when Fair Sky first launched, but now, as Australia prepared for the Asia-Pacific Sustainable Transport Summit, they couldn't afford to lag. Their head of innovation, Maddie Liu, tapped her pen on the table. Our score is 61.5. That's barely compliant. Morningstar just downgraded us. Another officer, Tariq Mahmood, flipped through internal memos. Board wants a mandatory ethics officer on every flight crew team. They say it's overkill. Maddie frowned. They want us to add personnel? That's expensive. Tariq shrugged. But if we don't, our routes to Singapore and Tokyo will be flagged. We lose code share agreements. The CEO, Grace Yoon, sighed and leaned back. Fine. Let's hire 2 onboard compliance officers as pilots in training. They can monitor passenger feedback and get our IT to integrate Fair Sky's API before next quarter. Back in San Francisco, Odessa received a text from Asha Ramani, the journalist who'd popularized Slap Heard Around the Skies. Her message read, We're doing a long form on how Fair Sky is reshaping transportation globally. Need a few quotes. Can you talk tomorrow? Odessa paused. She had interviewed once before, long ago, but now she wanted to protect her privacy. She replied, "Send me your questions. I'll respond in writing." Asha typed almost immediately. 1. Do you ever worry you've gone too far? 2. What's next? 3. How do you keep humble when the world is chasing you? Odessa set the phone aside and took a deep breath. She wasn't sure how to answer too far, but she'd try later. Right now, she had a dinner with Darla Reyes to prepare. She'd be moderating a session on global ethics in transit with 5 transport ministers from Canada, Germany, Kenya, Brazil, and India. That afternoon, Simone and Sierra splashed into the hotel pool. For a moment, the world felt distant. No hashtags, no headlines, just laughter and chlorine. "Do you think they'll ever forget us?" Simone asked, hovering on a floaty. Sierra floated next to her. "I don't know, but I hope not. If they forget the reason all this started." Simone nodded. "Grandma says it's not about being famous. It's about being heard." Sierra held out her hand. "Race you to the shallow end?" They dove under together, the cool water swallowing their laughter. For now, it was enough. Early evening found Odessa at the Bayview Institute, addressing a crowd of transport ministers and ethics officers. She stood before a semicircle of unfamiliar faces. "Thank you all for joining," she began, voice steady. "When I built Fair Sky, I imagined it as a tool for airlines. No, for all passenger carriers, to ensure every traveler received basic dignity. What started as a dozen lines of code has grown into a global standard. But the true measure of success isn't in the number of signatories. It's in the everyday journeys of travelers." She clicked her remote, and a slide appeared. A photograph of a young mother, her wheelchair-bound son beside her, both smiling in an airport terminal. The caption read, "First time we boarded without having to pre-board." Often, Odessa continued, the smallest gestures, like allowing a mother to board normally, can reshape an entire policy. Dignity doesn't come from headlines. It comes from moments like these. A transport minister from Kenya, Rashida Odinga, spoke up. "Your system has already made an impact. Our bus lines are talking about adopting a similar rating. How do we scale this across different modes of transit?" Odessa leaned forward. "The principles are the same: real-time feedback, transparent reporting, and accountability. Whether you're running a ferry or a bullet train, you need metrics that passengers trust and that investors finance." Another minister from Brazil, Joaquim Alves, asked, "How do we handle cultural differences? What dignifies a passenger in Tokyo may not be the same in Sao Paulo." Odessa nodded. "We designed Fair Sky's API to be customizable. Local stakeholders set the weightings, but the baseline, no racial profiling, no undue delays, no humiliating screenings, is universal. Those are non-negotiables." They spent the next hour discussing implementation timetables, pilot programs, and resource sharing. Whenever a question drifted toward politics, Odessa steered it back to process. Don't debate whether dignity is important. Prove it with data. That night, Odessa returned to her garden at the Grantham. She'd brought home another photograph, this time of a group of elderly passengers who'd organized a petition after witnessing a wheelchair user being forced to wait in line. She placed the new image next to the others in her before and after drawer, testimony that echoed across demographics. Sierra and Simone stepped out, toweling off. Sierra held up her tablet. "Grandma, look. We got a note from a teacher in Chicago. She says she started a fair travel club at her school." Simone beamed. "Kids are teaching kids." Odessa smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "That's exactly how it should work." They stood there, 3 generations under the soft glow of the garden lamps. The quiet night air felt full of possibility, of memory, of something that felt like hope. Simone yawned. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" Odessa reached down and hugged them both. "We will, every day." The following morning, the FAA's website went live with a new landing page. Track your airline's ethics score here. Passengers clicking on the tool found a heat map showing regional compliance, digital ethics badges next to each carrier's logo, a filter allowing travelers to choose flights based on dignity metrics. Within hours, travel forums exploded. Never flying United again. Look at their 58 rating. My grandma's mobility issues finally matter. Thank you, Fair Sky. Just booked Alaska Air, 72 on ethics scale. Every post carried a link to the Fair Sky portal, and in the corner of the page, a small icon read, "Powered by Passenger Equity Framework, founded by O. Caldwell." As Odessa read through notifications on her phone, Sierra climbed onto her lap. "Grandma, does this ever feel scary?" Odessa hugged her tightly. "Sometimes, but if you stand for what's right, sometimes you have to be a little scared." Sierra pressed her cheek against Odessa's. "I want to be brave like you." Odessa closed her eyes. "You already are." Outside, a jet bank, the area where planes idled before takeoff, lit up the dawn sky. Planes taxied toward the runway. Their passengers would board under a new promise: to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with respect. And for Odessa Caldwell, this was just the beginning. Odessa's phone buzzed with a news alert just as the cabin lights flipped on for boarding hours later. FAA announces mandatory passenger equity framework for all U.S. carriers. In a brief but definitive statement, the FAA declared that any airline wishing to operate or expand routes, even domestic charters, would now need to maintain a passenger equity score of at least 65. Failure to comply meant losing access to federal grants, route approvals, and code share privileges. Within minutes, travel apps updated to display each carrier's ethics rating alongside price and travel time. Social feeds branched into two camps, those celebrating a new era of accountability and those accusing the government of overreach. But most casual travelers were simply curious. Would their next ticket reflect this new dignity score? At Denver International's Gate C14, a retired schoolteacher tapped through the airline list on her tablet. She raised an eyebrow at the 58 rating next to her usual preference, then closed the app and switched her booking to a different carrier with a 72. Beside her, a young dad asked the gate agent, "Is Flyer Air really a 62? My daughter's on chemo. Can I trust them with her boarding process?" The agent offered only a polite shrug, pointing out where to find grievance reporting if needed. A week ago, none of this would have made sense. Now, passengers like them navigated an entirely new priority: ethics first. At Sky North's Crisis Center, the impact hit like a wave. Their current score hovered at 59 after retroactive charges. The station manager in Denver saw 3 open seats in first class go unclaimed, despite a last-minute fare drop. A local travel blogger tweeted, "Sky North stuck in the ethics penalty box, and it's 2025, folks." Meanwhile, Horizon Air, who'd quietly signed the charter 2 days earlier, ran a temporary promotion. Their ethics badge flashed green on every ad. "Fly Horizon Air. Score 74. Travel with dignity." Ticket sales spiked by 18% in just 24 hours. Back in Washington, D.C., the FAA held a press briefing. Administrator Darla Reyes summarized the metrics. Initial reviews show 75% of major carriers have already committed or begun the certification process. We expect a full industry transition within 90 days. This is not a passing trend. Passenger dignity is now integral to financial and regulatory approval in U.S. airspace. Reporters peppered her with questions about enforcement. Darla confirmed that ethics audits would be unannounced and that consumer complaints would feed directly into each airline's public compliance dashboard. As Odessa watched clips of the briefing from her home office, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was exactly the tipping point she'd designed for, when honoring dignity ceased to be a niche debate and became part of mainstream decision-making. Around the country, union representatives and HR teams scrambled to distribute crew conduct training modules and passenger interaction guidelines to cabin staff. Flight attendants who once joked about routing problem passengers to back seats now had to review new scripts on transparency and apology protocols. Snooty first-class perks were being reevaluated through a new lens: inclusion. That evening, Sierra and Simone texted Odessa excitedly. "We just saw a viral video. 2 pilots gave up their jump seats so a wheelchair user could avoid the jet bridge. They said, 'That's worth more than our coffee gift cards.'" Simone added, "Airport staff cheering. It's kinda nice to see people clap for something real." Odessa folded her newspaper and closed her laptop. "Let systems serve people, not reputations," she'd written months ago. Now, as the circuit breakers flipped across the industry, she knew those words were proving true. And, in the quiet that followed the headlines, a new rhythm took hold. One where every boarding pass carried not just a destination, but a promise of respect. By the time Sierra and Simone arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth 6 months later, neither of them felt a flutter of anxiety. That was new. As they wheeled their suitcases into the Sky North first-class lounge, a young flight attendant named Priya checked their boarding passes with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Caldwell. Welcome back," Priya said, handing the girls their tickets. No extra scrutiny, no perfunctory glances, just informational. "Boarding will start at 3:15. Sierra and Simone exchanged a quick grin. It felt striking, almost surreal, that they'd gone from being treated like interlopers to being recognized by name. They settled into the plush chairs, unwrapped a snack plate with fruit and cheese, and watched as other travelers, families, business people, retirees, milled around peacefully. At exactly 3:15, Priya reappeared. "Ladies, Flight 842 is now boarding. You're welcome to go first." She gestured to the younger daughter, Simone, as if she'd truly been expecting them. On the jet bridge, Simone paused to adjust her backpack. Even that felt different, no side-eye or open suspicion. Instead, a fellow passenger in economy leaned over and said, "Thanks for paving the way. My niece has cerebral palsy. I know boarding used to be a nightmare." Simone simply nodded. "Happy to see things changing." When they stepped into the cabin, every seatbelt buckle and linen bib felt like a small triumph. The seatbelt extension came without question. The overhead bins opened without fuss. A flight attendant brought both girls water immediately. No need to ask. Once seated, Sierra unzipped her laptop case. A minute later, the chief purser, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, came by. "I just wanted to introduce myself," she said. "I'm Dana. The airline wants to thank you and your grandmother for helping us see where we went wrong. We're holding a video training tonight on inclusive service protocols, and I hope you'll join us. No cameras, just a Q&A if you feel like it." Sierra nodded, blinking back emotion. "Thank you. That means a lot." Below them, a group of flight attendants was already practicing a new greeting script over headsets. Phrases designed to convey respect rather than code phrases meant to expedite a passenger off the plane. One attendant said, "Good afternoon. How can I make your flight comfortable today?" rather than, "You're in row 5L, right?" As the engine started, Simone pressed play on her tablet. A short documentary clip about Fair Sky's global adoption. She watched scenes of bus lines in Nairobi and ferries in Amsterdam receiving ethics badges, then smiled at her sister. "Look at this. Grandma's remarks in Berlin. It's in 3 languages now." Sierra leaned over. "She told me the other day, real change only happens when they can't ignore your existence anymore. I think today they can't." Simone nodded. "I can't wait to tell her." When the captain's voice came over the PA, "Welcome aboard, Flight 842 to San Francisco. Proud to serve you with dignity today." Simone closed her eyes, letting go of the last 6 months. Once, she'd believed that first class was off limits. Now, it was no longer a gilded cage, but a place where respect was the real upgrade. Outside, the airport tarmac faded beneath them. Inside, Sierra and Simone leaned in, shoulders touching. They remembered the slap, the politics, the freezes, the Senate hearings, and realized how far they'd collectively traveled. As the plane climbed through clear sky, Simone whispered, "We made it happen." Sierra grinned. "Yeah, we did." The first green lights of dawn spilled into the terminals of 6 major airports: Atlanta, Chicago, O'Hare, Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, New York JFK, and Seattle-Tacoma. In each, a pilot on the tarmac saw a new icon pop up on her tablet. Passenger Ethics Flag, PEF, active, score 78. In the gate lounges, flight attendants checked their tablets and noticed next to their credentials a small colored dot indicating their provisional ethics score for the day. At Atlanta Hartsfield, a veteran attendant named Marisol Torres paused before boarding started. Her PEF read 92, green. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering how last year her score would have been invisible. She'd been untracked in the old system. Now, when she greeted a passenger in a wheelchair, her smile felt personal, rewarded by the interface. Behind her, an older businessman glanced at his own PEF, an amber 65. He furrowed his brow but nodded at Marisol's greeting before wheeling toward the aircraft. Up in the sky, news tickers began reporting the first metrics from the 6 airports. Total flights issued ethics scores, 328 average passenger compliance, 89 crew-patient interaction commendations, 47 in first shift, ethics violation alerts, 5 codes auto-generated. Among those 5 was code PEF 407, tagged to a gate agent who had scolded a young black father for asking to board early with his toddler, despite clear medical documentation for the child's condition. An AI-backed review scanned surveillance footage and passenger testimony, assigning that agent a provisional violation. By noon, an HR message asked her to review a training module on non-discriminatory boarding protocols. In the FAA building, Administrator Darla Reyes watched these early reports with satisfaction. On a large screen, she saw a graph comparing last month's absent compliance data, when ethics was purely voluntary, against today's live PEF scores. The shift was dramatic. Airlines that had resisted now scrambled to update policies. "Within 48 hours, Darla murmured. "We'll see which carriers truly internalize this." Meanwhile, Global Green Capital, an international ESG fund, sent a memo to its investors. Effective next quarter, airline valuations will include passenger ethics flag scores as 15% of our weighting criteria. Financial analysts buzzed. Suddenly, ethics scores weren't just for show. A dip in PEF from 85 to 75 could knock a carrier's stock down by 3 to 5%. Social media users already posted images of airline logos overlaid with their PEF ranges: green, 80 to 100, yellow, 60 to 79, red, 60. Back in the terminals, passengers noticed subtle changes encouraged by the flag system. When a family with a service dog boarded, ground staff used a discreet compassion protocol to fast-track them. Their PEF readout glowed brighter on their boarding passes. Elsewhere, travelers downloaded a new mobile app to see real-time ethics updates. Delayed flights now displayed reasons like PEF audit in progress instead of mechanical issues, signaling that passenger treatment could prompt a spot check. By late afternoon, storylines emerged. "Ethics over ease?" asked one travel blog, profiling an upset passenger at Chicago O'Hare, whose request for a pre-boarding seat was initially denied, until another staffer intervened, citing a newly published PEF guideline. Crew commendation, Seattle Flight 442, highlighted an attendant who used the onboard PEF tablet to flag a fellow passenger's medical needs, allowing paramedics to meet the flight on arrival. As sunset tinted the airport windows orange, Odessa Caldwell sat in her San Francisco office, reviewing the first full-day PEF analytics. 6 airports, hundreds of flights, tens of thousands of data points. Her shoulders relaxed at the knowledge that a system designed to protect dignity had finally moved from policy to practice. She typed a quick note to her team. Phase T on schedule. Expand to 12 hubs by quarter's end. Prepare incident training videos based on today's violations. Then she paused and smiled. The groundswell of real-time accountability had begun, and soon enough, every boarding pass would carry not just a destination, but a promise. To be seen, to be valued, to be treated with respect. 6 months later, Sierra and Simone sat in the Sky North first-class lounge at Dallas-Fort Worth, waiting for their connecting flight. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Nothing like the tension they recalled from their first journey. They were older now. Sierra had just started her freshman year of high school, and Simone was finishing middle school. They'd both grown an inch or two, and their voices carried a confidence that hadn't been there before. When the lounge attendant Priya greeted them by name, Simone smiled. "Thanks for having us again, Priya," she said. "Feels normal." Priya nodded. "It is now. Have a snack before boarding? Flight 712 should start in about 15 minutes. As Simone poured orange juice, Sierra glanced at the departure board. Beside their flight number was a small green icon, PEF 82. Sierra thought of how daunting it once felt just to sit in first class. Now, she saw families with children, seniors with canes, even a service dog's harness stroll past, each passenger treated with the same understated dignity. When boarding began, they moved forward. A young mother in a wheelchair approached the gate agent next to them. As the staff scanned her boarding pass, the agent offered her an aisle chair without being asked. The mother's face lit up, and she mouthed "thank you" to them before rolling down the jet bridge. Sierra caught Simone's eye. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Simone shook her head. "Not back then, but Grandma said, 'Systems serve people, not reputations.'" Sierra finished for her. They both laughed softly. Inside the cabin, the chief purser, Dana, stopped by their seats. "Miss Caldwell, good to see you both. Our crew has been updated on your grandmom's work. If there's anything you need, just let me know." Sierra felt a warm glow. "Thank you, really." Dana's kindness wasn't a show. It was the new normal. Pilots and flight attendants wearing a tiny patch on their lapels, indicating their compliance with the passenger equity framework. Even the in-flight magazines carried a sidebar on dignity in air travel, with tips for passengers. Once the plane was airborne, Simone unzipped her backpack and pulled out a small notebook, the same kind Grandma Odessa used. She tapped at the first page. "Today, I wasn't afraid to be seen." Sierra watched the clouds drift below. "Grandma would be proud." Simone wrote, "We helped change the sky." When the captain's voice came over the intercom, "At Sky North, we commit to serving every passenger with respect and care," both sisters closed their eyes. It wasn't just lip service. It was an echo of 6 months of policy shifts, Senate hearings, investor pressures, and thousands of passengers demanding better. It was the culmination of one slap, one call, and a system that refused to stay silent. As the jet leveled off, Sierra looked at her sister. "What happens next?" Simone shrugged. "We keep flying, and maybe tell Grandma the sky feels different." Sierra smiled, then leaned her head against the window. "Yeah, it does." Outside, the sun glinted off the wings. Inside, they were no longer invisible. They were evidence that a single act of injustice could spark change. A promise that every boarding pass now held. To be seen, to be valued, to be treated with dignity. If this story changed your perspective on air travel and respect, share it with a friend. Each share helps spread the message of justice. Why it works. Encourages sharing, increasing the video's reach.